Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to give folks the chance to get settled, and we'll be getting started shortly. And good morning to those of you who might be in the West Coast. So we'll get started shortly. So thank you for being with us. All right, I see the numbers rising. So we'll give it another minute and then we'll get going. All right, in the interest of time, why don't we get going? Good afternoon and good morning, everyone, again. Paul Francisco, one of the leaders here at the Men's Dinner Group, along with Emerson Foster. This is day 2 of our virtual conference, Men of Color Conference, and we had a really, I would say, active and engaging day 1 of this conversation, which was more focused around personal development, economic opportunity, and now today we're going to be focusing more on the social justice issues, contemporary topics, obviously, what you're about to hear from Bakari and from Mo Cowan. We're really excited about that. So thank you for coming back for day 2, for those of you who were here day 1, and for those of you who are first timers joining us, welcome. With that said, I'm going to turn it over to one of our organizing committee members and a good brother who's been with us for a long time, Wendell Bishop. And Wendell is the Director of Strategic Sourcing for Emerson College. And Wendell will make the introduction of Bakari Sellers, our keynote today, one of our keynotes today. So Wendell, over to you.
Thank you very much, Paul. And for everybody out there listening, welcome to The Election is Over, Now What? We're humbled and excited to have Bakari Sellers and Senator Mo Cowan with us today. Each one is going to take about 15 minutes to give their perspective of where we stand in this political climate, followed by Q&A from the audience. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Bakari Sellers, attorney, politician, political commentator, who in 2006, at the age of 22, became the youngest African-American elected official in the United States. And now we are privileged to see him as a political analyst on CNN. Bakari, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I always start when I speak by letting people know and where I represent the big city of Denmark, South Carolina, where we have 3 stoplights and a blinking light. And I always tell people that my mom and dad would always say that the 2 most important words in the English language are the words thank you, and they're not nearly said enough. And so I want to thank everyone who is a part of this program, everyone who's a part of the dinner group for having me. Paul, you know, thank you so much for helping put this together. Wendell, you're going to have your hands full navigating with me and Mo, but we should have fun over the next hour. And Senator Mo Cowan, look, always been a brother that I look up to and stand on the shoulders of. And so I just want to say thank you so very much for all that you have meant to so many of us. You're not a bad old guy to look up to, Mo. Look, this is an interesting topic. And now that this election is over, for the most part, I know some people are still entertaining this like it's still going on. I think it's important for us, particularly men of color, to Black men, to understand truly two questions of how far have we come and where do we go from here. And I'm not going to go into a elongated spiel, but I do think that we need to continue to focus on tearing down the systems of oppression that have proved to be debilitating in many communities. And I think that there's no greater highlight than that of coronavirus. COVID-19 has ripped the Band-Aid off the systemic inequities we have in our communities. And, you know, you can talk about the 55% of white women who voted for Donald Trump, or the 70 million people who voted for Donald Trump, or you can go down whatever path you want to go down. But I will still highlight the fact that this virus has shown us the inequities that are ravaging our communities. And I want to break that down. I want to peel that layer back. What this virus has shown us is that Black folk and Native Americans have been the most devastated communities, have died at disparate rates to their counterparts first. Their businesses, from an economic perspective, have been shuttered, have run up against pitfalls that cannot be overcome at higher rates. And when people ask the question why, that's when we peel back the layer of the onion, as they say. And we look into communities a lot like mine in Denmark, South Carolina, a lot of Black communities throughout this country. You have these communities where they don't have potable water. There are 100 cities in these United States that have less potable water or more lead in their drinking water than Flint, Michigan. The overwhelming majority of them are Black and brown communities. You have food deserts where people can't go 2 or 3 miles and get access to fresh fruits and vegetables, a lot like how I grew up in Denmark. And so when people get the packets of Kool-Aid and the 1 pound of sugar just to stretch for a week, it's no secret why you may be predisposed to diabetes. Or you layer that on top of the fact that in all the infinite wisdom of the Affordable Care Act, there wasn't a provision in place for those Southern Republican governors who didn't want to expand Medicaid. So now the rural hospitals are shutting down, and where you need to go get your preventive care, there are no options. And so you layer that on top of the fact that many times your communities, your housing communities, et cetera, are next to brownfields, or have to inhale the environmental injustices that stem from the manufacturing plant that's right next door. You take all of these ills, and then you overlay them with the pandemic, and it's no secret why you see our communities being devastated by this disease, by this virus at a higher rate. And this is the point that I want to make about where we are in this country. I want people to clearly understand that racism didn't start with Donald Trump, and to help build some guideposts as to what I am talking about specifically. Stokely Carmichael once said that if you want to lynch me, that's your problem. But if you have the power to lynch me, that's my problem. And the systemic issues that I'm talking about, the systemic racism, these institutions of oppression that we must tear down in our country, these systems of oppression that we must tear down in our country are power constructs. It's not somebody calling you nigger. I get that all the time. All you got to do is go look on my Twitter page. When I get off CNN, I get threats all over the place. It's not that. But it's these environmental injustices that we're talking about. It's these educational injustices that we're talking about, because kids in this country are penalized because of the zip code that they're born into. It's a criminal justice system, which we know, unfortunately, operates off slave labor. And I tell people that the criminal justice system ain't broken. In fact, the criminal justice system works perfectly. It just wasn't built for us. You talk about a healthcare system where access to quality care is fleeting for most men and women of color. And our sisters, my wife in particular, 3 to 4 times more likely to die during childbirth. And African-American female mortality is a serious issue that still has biases which go unsolved and unremedied. And so you asked this question. I mean, yeah, I am more hopeful today than I was the day before the election. I'm more hopeful today than a few days before the election, but I also am very real and very sober about where we are. And so understanding that challenge, I mean, we are living in a time that is the weirdest convergence of American history that I think people can read or write about. 2020 has been like a combination of the great pandemic of 1918 and 1919 meets the Great Depression of 1928 and 1929 meets the racial unrest of 1968. And this is all that we've been facing during this one year. And so people ask me this question all the time. And Mo, I know you get this question all the time. They say, does this moment feel any different? And many times I just take a step back and I acknowledge that this does feel different, but there's one axiom, there's one idiom in politics that I always ascribe to, is that trust but verify. And yes, Taylor Swift and Carson Wentz and Netflix is donating so much money and all of these things are happening. And so this moment, it feels different. However, I'm sober because I realize as a country, we've been here before. Mamie Till in 1955, one of the strongest women of the movement, decided that she was going to have an open casket to show the world what bigotry, racism, and xenophobia had done to her young son, Emmett. Back before you could go viral on TikTok or Snapchat, or on Facebook or Twitter or IG, you went viral in Ebony magazine. And that picture went around the country on the front page of Ebony magazine. And the country was able to lay eyes on this young boy who hadn't been able to graduate high school, hadn't been able to walk down an aisle, hadn't been able to realize his full self, 13 years old. And we missed that moment. Then you had John Lewis and many others on the Evan Pettus Bridge. It was the first time that nightly news cameras had zoomed in and focused on Black brutality on that bridge. They were beaten with billy clubs, and first time that the audiences were able to see the water hoses and the dogs. They were able to see the pure evil of Bull Connor. And we missed that moment. And then April 4th of 1968, the country was on the verge of pulling apart. And you guys know this story better than I, the legendary James Brown concert, which helped hold Massachusetts together. But we felt like after the assassination of King that the country may be coming together, but we missed that moment. And then most recently in my lifetime in 2015, in June of 2015, my good friend Clemente Pinckney led a straggly white boy that I ain't never seen before into his church, Mother Emanuel AME. Set him right beside him, didn't sit him in the back or on the other side. He set him right beside him as they did Bible study, and they prayed and they studied and they learned and they taught for a full hour. And then they had a benediction, and Dylan Roof pulled out his .45 and shot Clem in the neck and shot 8 others in what's called the Charleston Massacre. And I remember I was sitting next to Sonny Hostin at the funeral of my good friend Clem. We were in TD Arena in downtown Charleston. It was packed. Hillary Clinton was in there. Everybody was in there. And Barack Obama came in. And I remember when Barack Obama sang Amazing Grace. Now, he was off key as all hell. You know you off key when the AME bishops got to back you up. But even during that moment when he sang Amazing Grace, we felt like for a moment, maybe that we would get there. And we missed that moment. And so now we find ourselves again trying to figure out where this country is going. This election is over. I always tell people that election takes are better served cold. Everybody wants to have a hot take, but don't nobody know what they're talking about right now because we ain't really even seen the numbers yet. But as we see what happened in this election, we realize that the reason that we were able to have some semblance of success, at least at the top, was because of Black folk. Because of Black folk in cities like Detroit, Black folk in cities like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, Las Vegas and Phoenix, Atlanta, Georgia, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Detroit, Michigan. Again, being the backbone of democracy, saving this country from itself. And so the question of where do we go from here lies fundamentally in the ability for us to continue to dream with our eyes open. It lies fundamentally in the ability for us to continue to love our neighbors even when they don't love us. Two very aspirational topics and two very aspirational challenges that I give groups all the time because I try to ascribe to do those things myself. And so my last point to you is that as we answer, as Mo and I try to navigate this question of the election now being over, where do we go from here and what is left for our country to do, which is so much. I think Mo and I would both agree that if you asked us how far have we come, we would be clear in our assertion that we've made a ton of progress, but we still have so far to go. And so I think that as we begin to go back into a stricter quarantine period, as cases begin to rise, I guess my last challenge for you all is to make sure that when this pandemic is over, you come out of this pandemic stronger physically, mentally, spiritually, and emotionally than you went in. The reason being is because we need you now more than ever. We need you now more than ever because many people hope that this is a moment, but I'm here to tell you that this is a movement that requires all hands on deck, a movement that requires all of us to continue to be the backbone of democracy. A country that truly hasn't loved us, we always tend to love it back harder because we still believe in what Abraham Lincoln called the better angels of our nature. So as one door closes, another door opens. And I remind people often that voting is just the front door of democracy. And now that we're inside, the real work must begin. So with that, I'll pass it back to Wendell, who's going to introduce one of my heroes and somebody who forever will have the title of United States Senator and somebody who a lot of young politicos like myself aspire to be like and just watch from afar and simply say, thank you, Mo Cowan.
Thank you for the insightful words. You leave us a lot to ponder, Bakari. And to your point about Mo, I was remiss in not mentioning that you were also the best-selling author of My Vanishing Country, a memoir.
You can't be forgetting that, man. I worked hard for that one.
We'll make sure we put the link in the chat. And without further ado, Senator Mo Cowan, what has this man not done? Partner at Mitz Levin, Chief Legal Counsel and Chief of Staff for Governor Deval Patrick, U.S. Senator, and currently he's with General Electric as President of Global Government Affairs and Policies. Thank you so much for taking a couple minutes to join us this afternoon, Mo. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Wendell. Thanks for that kind introduction. I have a 16-year-old son. Whenever he hears an intro like that, he jokes that, his old man can't keep a job. So I've had a few trips around the merry-go-round, done a lot of interesting things, but I'm grateful to be here today to have a chance to engage in conversation with the audience, with this group, the dinner club, which I've had a chance to actually break bread with a couple of times over the last couple of years, not nearly as much as I'd like, but it's good for us all to come together virtually. So I really do appreciate the invitation. I'm also honored to be here today with Bakari Sellers. And I was going to come on and joke that, Bakari as always is profound, thoughtful, thought-provoking, and it was a mistake on my part to let him go first. But then he ended his remarks by saying some incredibly nice, perhaps false things about me, but so now maybe the order was just fine for my purposes. Bakari began with a thank you. I've offered my thanks. I think we both come to this work, to these conversations grounded in our upbringing, our family sense of self and sense of community. He grew up in a small town in South Carolina. I grew up in a small town just north of that border in Yadkinville, North Carolina. We might have had 2 stoplights when I was growing up, Bakari, but we only had 3,000 people and a whole lot, not many of them were Black. So I grew up in a world in the Deep South that was divided on the remnants of the Jim Crow era and the Civil Rights movement. and then I found my way to Boston. So it's a pleasure to be on this stage, if you will, with you. And I look forward to the conversation we'll have together in a second. You know, I just want to reflect on the election, because for many on this Zoom, we may think it's over. And by all accounts, by all traditional measures, in fact, it is. But as we see in the news every day, every hour, there may be as much as half of the nation who actually isn't accepting that truth. This is always going to be a controversial year for elections. We had an incumbent president who, for the past 4 years, has governed in a way that most of us living now had never seen before. The so-called norms that guide our sense of democracy and government, many would say were all thrown out the window, or at least disregarded. So we knew this electoral cycle was going to be radically different than what we've grown accustomed to. We saw a robust and action-packed and candidate-packed Democratic primary with 20 plus candidates representing an interesting diaspora of the Democratic political mindset and ideology vie for the nomination. And for that nomination ultimately to go to a veteran of the Democratic process machinery, Joe Biden, some 40 plus years in Washington, D.C. in Congress. At one point, like my co-speaker here, Bakari Sellers, Joe Biden was one of the youngest members ever elected to the office he held in the United States Senate. That process started out, that primary started out with this interesting visage of the diversity across the Democratic voting population, at least as we thought we understood it, with women, Black candidates, Asian candidates, candidates of different ages, different backgrounds, political veterans, newcomers. And then we ended up with two of the oldest candidates in the history of the United States, both vying for the presidency. And actually now ended up with a president-elect who's the oldest person ever to have that position for the first time. Happy early birthday to President-elect Biden, who's got a 78th birthday coming up soon. Throughout that campaign, certainly for the first time in my life that I can remember it, being of age, because again, I was born on the tail end of the civil rights movement. I was born precisely a year after Dr. King was shot and killed on April 4th, 1968. And James Brown helped calm the city of Boston. But in my lifetime, I'd never seen the kind of political debates we were going to have this year, certainly sparked and spawned by events that Bakari has spoken so eloquently about. The pandemic, how it rages still, but how it has cut through and cut deep into communities of color, particularly Black communities, brown communities, immigrant communities, the poor communities, which too often still are the Black, brown, and immigrant communities. How it's devastated those communities. And then with George Floyd, which at the time was but the latest example of Black lives being devalued, snuffed out, destroyed by the power structure. The combination of those events amplified the conversation around social justice, racial justice, in a year where that was already going to be on the ballot because of the way the last 4 years have played out and the way that we have talked about and lived through these last 4 years. And of course, then we had a Democratic ticket for the first time in the history of this country, where we had a Black and South Asian woman to be on the ticket as the vice presidential candidate. So we knew these issues that we've come together to talk about were going to be very much part of the conversation. And it was interesting because the combination of those issues in this time and the perceptions and the actions and the conversation around the incumbent and issues around race, the rise of white supremacy, or at least the openness around white supremacy that we've seen over the last few years, We all expected a massive turnout among the electorate, particularly among Black and brown voters, that this was going to be an election where so many of our issues were going to be on the ballot that we were going to come out in force and to ensure that our voices were going to be heard. And to help ensure that, as Bakari spoke to, some stalwarts in the electoral process in the Black community made damn sure that was going to happen, starting with our sisters, Black women, as Bakari said, who more often than not have saved the Democratic Party often from itself. Worked hard to make sure Black people of all stripes across this country understood the importance of this election, what was at stake. And yes, you know the names like Stacey Abrams, who after her losing her race in Georgia in 2018, doubled down and got busy and to great effect of registering almost 1 million new voters in Georgia. And so what's the net effect? You see Georgia turn blue, as we say, for the first time since 1992. And yes, they're doing a recount, and they'll do a recount. The net effect of it will be, no matter how many times you count it, Joe Biden's gonna win Georgia 2-3 times, the number is still the same. But it was, our community said, this is, and we always hear this, right? This is the most consequential election of our lifetime. This turns out to be a truly consequential election. So Black folks came out. Our Latino brothers and sisters came out. Asians came out, white people came out, everybody came out. We had more votes this election than we've had in the history of the United States. As of today, Joe Biden has 10 million more votes, received 10 million more votes than Barack Obama, who before this election was the candidate who had received the most votes in US history in 2008. Take note, as of today, the person who's received the second most votes in the history of the United States is Donald J. Trump in this election. So it wasn't just Black and brown folks coming out, everybody came out. And the question, I think, on the minds of many of us is, for that second group, those who came out and offered even more votes for the incumbent president, what was motivating them? And if you really want to drill down further, what was motivating the Black and brown voters who gave more of their votes this time to Donald Trump than they gave in 2016? We've all heard it over the last few days. You know, if you look back over the last 4 years and you look at the way this administration has governed, you look at the issues, you look at the president's rhetoric, the way his supporters talk about him and those who oppose him, if you're Black or brown, how could you vote for this president? Vote for 4 more years, as folks would say. And I think it's an interesting question that needs to give rise to some serious conversation, right? Over the next whatever amount of time. Because I think we have to ask ourselves, what is it that our communities care most about? What do they need most? And what do they think about when they go into the voting booth? You know, I was having a conversation through this medium, which is pretty much the only way we engage folks these days, with someone who told me, someone who looks like me, looks like us, who told me that they voted for Trump. And I asked the question, what was your motivation? More to the point, I said, you know, a lot of folks would tell you that if the president isn't racist, he certainly speaks with racist rhetoric, or he is racist adjacent, whatever word you want to use, or he hasn't done enough for our communities. I said, talk me through your thinking. First of all, it was remarkable that they said they're aware of all those things, obviously, or at least all of the conversation. But in some sense, they were dismissive of those things or disregarded them. And I said, why? And the answer was because, interestingly enough, their view is racism is predominant in this nation. And so that in and of itself, if you're talking about the political spectrum, political environment, alone can't be a disqualifier. And then they wanted to talk about the president's economic policies, the low unemployment rate for Black Americans pre-pandemic. A lot of conversation about pocketbook issues, a lot of conversations about immigration, about how closing the border helps preserve jobs for communities of color. It was a fascinating conversation. And what it told me was two things. One, the conversation we tend to have in moments like this truly isn't a black and white conversation. It shouldn't be a black and white conversation. Black folks are not monolithic. Latino folks aren't monolithic. We don't vote as a block. Growing up in the Deep South, as Bakari and I did, growing up in a Black Southern church, you want to find a real conservative, Black conservative, go to a Black Southern church. They're conservative around issues of the social issues for sure, whether that's abortion, whether it's immigration, any number of topics. Legalization of marijuana, right? I grew up in a Southern church. I tell you right now, I don't know how they all voted, but I bet if I were to just talk about those issues, most of them would sound far more conservative than we typically take for granted here in the Northeast. So we tend to talk about these things in a black and white fashion as if we're one monolithic voting bloc, but we know that it's not to be the case. Our national parties actually treat us as if we're these monolithic voting blocs, right? And what has happened over time, something has metastasized. So that you have one party who too often may take us for granted, and the other national party who maybe too often try to take advantage of us, or take us for, or disregard us. So what is happening, I think, among the Black community writ large is there's a pox on both houses. And I think you see that in some of those who vote for Trump, who say, listen, I'm not going to be blindly beholden to the Democratic platform because I'm not convinced that the Democratic platform always works for me or that they always hear my voice. At the same time, many of those folks say, Republican Party's got nothing for me either. And so I'm going to be less dogmatic about party. I'm going to focus on the issues that matter most to me. And yes, there are some Black and brown folks out there who say, you know, this country being racist is something I've just grown. It is how it is. So can't be the sole issue I vote on. Like, I'm going to vote for the one who might be willing, at least has said enough to me about the things I cared about. And they were willing to take that gamble. And that's how you see an uptick in the Black and brown votes that I think this president won. Now, that may be distressing for some or all of us in this call, and I suspect there are plenty of people in this call who disagree with me on that assessment, and I haven't gone deep on these issues because, as Bakari said, there's a lot of data yet to be analyzed, a lot of conversations to be held. But we find ourselves today, regardless, at a time of great division in our country. And I think Black communities, brown communities sit right in the fulcrum of that division. And I think for us, as a community, as a people, again, we're not monolithic, so I don't assume everyone sees the same things that I see. But I do think in this moment, this is a tremendous opportunity for the Black community, if I can speak monolithically, coming out of this election. Because certainly as we sit here today, the National Democratic Party knows and is coming to accept that the Black vote, the Black voting bloc, perhaps is as powerful today as it ever has been. The challenge for all of us, as November 3rd has come and gone, is what are we going to do now? Because so often we pour energy, resources, and time into getting to an election, and ideally getting the result that we long for. And then we shake off our hands, walk away, and assume that everything else is going to go as planned. I'm here to tell you it will not. The election wasn't the end of anything. I challenge us all to think about it as the beginning of the next phase. And that phase needs to be Black and brown communities using our political power at every level to continue to push for and push on the issues we care about, regardless of which parties seem to have the power. Because yes, I still fundamentally believe in the principles giving rise to this nation, that the power actually resides in the people. But sadly, I also know that the people too often abdicate their responsibility and give that power to other people. And I assure you, there are plenty of people out there waiting to take it and use it to their benefit and often to your detriment. So I'm hoping that groups like this use our power to raise up the issues, positive and negative, that matter to our communities and our families, and we take those issues and keep them front and center for every day until the next presidential election and every election in between. And I don't just mean at the state or federal level, I mean in your city and town where real governance actually happens. And I encourage and challenge us all to be informed, engaged, committed citizens. We owe it to ourselves, we owe it to our families, we owe it to the generations yet to come, and we damn sure owe it to the generations who sacrificed so much for us to be on this Zoom today. We can no longer afford to say the election's over. If you voted for Joe Biden, you feel good about yourself. If you voted for Donald Trump, you may not feel so good about yourself, but guess what? We still have issues and challenges. And regardless of your political positioning, as Black people, we are connected and many of our issues are the same. And our issues will remain the problems that plague us, that hold us back, if we don't commit to align ourselves, find common cause, and let those know who have the seats of power, that power comes about by us, from us, so they need to be held responsible to us. And when and if they don't, we will use our power to find someone else to do that work. That is what lies ahead, the real work. Because when the next election rolls around, there should be no guessing from among this community who cares about and is focused on the issues we care about, because we should have spent every day between now and then telling them front and center what it is we care about. And if they can't get down with that, then they have made the choice for us as to whether or not they will be rehired or replaced. So I'm gonna leave it there. Look forward to the conversations and the dialogue.
Awesome, man, incredibly insightful, Mo, and Bakari as well. Emerson Foster here with you all, and you know, a lot of jewels were dropped in the last 35 minutes, and you know, the audience, judging by the chat, is appreciative of that and listening to every word. So let's start with some questions. And again, for the audience, if you have questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll get them to both Bakari and Mo. So Bakari, for you and Mo, you can certainly join in or answer this question as well. This perspective of this chasm within the Democratic Party at the moment between the progressive wing and the rank and file, or the ranking Democrats, if you will, and how some of the rhetoric from the progressive wing may have hurt down ticket in the party. Just any perspective on that? Is that real? Is it something that you think that the party can come together on, or is this going to continue to create fissures within that party moving forward?
So first of all, I think that all the time, anytime you have these type of discussions back and forth is healthy because people are communicating with each other. As my 4.5-pound Yorkie now goes crazy. That's what happens when you work from home. But you realize that a lot of these conversations are healthy. And let me tell you this, and I want to be as clear as I possibly can. Coming from South Carolina, I don't mean to push back on my United States Congressman, Jim Clyburn. However, we didn't lose these races because of defund the police. Defund the police is a horrible slogan. It's terrible. It's awful. Anytime I'm sitting here explaining to you what it means, it's awful. But that ain't why we lost. I think that, and I believe that AOC and Doug Jones, when the AOC and Doug Jones both agree on something, that means that you should probably listen to what they're saying. For far too long, Democrats have run outdated campaigns. Our campaign arms have to, the DSCC, the DCCC, we have to begin to, I mean, Brad Parscale down in Florida ran circles around us. The RCCC ran circles around us. And we have to begin to update the way that we run campaigns. Now, yeah, the slogans that we have many times, we need to hire a good PR firm because they suck, but that's not the reason we lost. And also, let me just also say this. This may be my Jimmy Carter playbook coming out, but I don't believe you can win any race and not knock on their door. Excuse me, I got to be proper. Not knock on any doors, right? And I know that we had a pandemic, and I know that it would have been the antithesis to Joe Biden's message, although even Joe Biden changed his plan on knocking on doors. But I had a long talk with Raphael Warnock, friend of mine. And I said, Raphael, if y'all don't knock on doors, and I don't mean Atlanta doors, because everybody want to volunteer and go to Atlanta, beautiful city. But I'm talking about Columbus, Macon, Augusta, Valdosta doors. That is the only way. You got to have a ground game that is up to date. You got to be able to do the things that even Barack Obama did in 08 and 12. But Democrats, we just have a stale way by which we campaign. Until we revamp that, I think we're going to have a long way to go. But I do appreciate, I really do appreciate the fact that, and I hope they're listening in the caucus. I hope that AOC is listening to Jim, and I hope Jim is listening to AOC. AOC politics can't win in South Carolina or Virginia. It can't. But the way that she's talking about uplifting and transforming campaigns, that actually works. So I think that they both have to listen to each other. And I think this is a healthy discussion to have.
Mo, can the caucus come together?
Oh, for sure. For sure. And I'm counting on them to do so. I mean, Bakari said it best. Like this, first of all, this happens after every election. We're in a different time now. We're just seeing it seeing more of it because of social media and things like that. You know, anytime, win or lose, every caucus does its postmortem, and there's a little bit of a circular firing squad in the beginning because somebody's not happy. And, you know, it's family business, right? We know how it is. Thanksgiving's around the corner. We know we love our family, but there's going to be some noise at Thanksgiving. Maybe not this year because of the pandemic, but that's what's happening here. And I agree with Bakari. That is healthy. That is healthy. There needs to be more of that all the time, I would submit to you. And just as the Black and brown communities aren't monolithic, the National Democratic Party can't actually or shouldn't think of itself as monolithic. I agree with Bakari. AOC talks about, if you sort of listen to what she's talking about, reaching out to and embracing those who've had the least and are often put upon the most, that is at the core of the Democratic Party, at least as of today. How you talk about it in Aiken versus Manhattan, two different things, right? Defund the police, right? I'm with Bakari on this. I've never liked that slogan. I know what the slogan is intended to be a shorthand for, but you gotta understand most voters, most folks don't know that and won't take the time to know that. And as good as the slogan can be in certain places, you got to figure out how to talk about what you actually mean in other places. Because when you talk about demilitarization of the police, less police, more social service, more community policing, putting more police, you know, have people from the community in the police force, better training, amazingly Black, white, Republican, Democrat, rich, lower income. Turns out there's a lot of people who agree about those things, right? So it's about figuring out how to communicate that message. And so, you know, but we live in a time now of sound bites, 30 seconds, tweets. So we got to find that thing that catches attention. But here's the thing, once you get that attention, you need to figure out what to do with it, right? And how to communicate the real message to the audiences you need to get it to. Yeah.
And we have a brother coming up in the next panel, Keila Sherrills, that can really speak pretty directly about the effectiveness of police reform in a city like Newark, New Jersey, and some of the work that he's doing there. So stay tuned for that. You mentioned, Mo, a couple times here, we're not a monolith, right? So there are many within our midst today that support the Republican Party and vote and lean that way. What should our brothers who support on that side be focused on in driving the conversation within that party to the benefit of our people? I mean, how should they, from our vantage points, for the ones of us, and I'll raise my hand, I'm not a Republican, but how should they, from your perspective, be comporting themselves within that machine to the benefit of our community? I don't know if that's a fair question, but I'm going to ask it.
Hey, fair enough. I'll take a shot at it. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
here's what I look, man. Here's what I would say: if you're a Republican voter and you support the what I'm going to call the traditional Republican conservative viewpoint, I respect that, right? As I said, we all don't need to think alike. As a matter of fact, I think it's important we spend a lot more time talking to people who don't always see the world the same way we do. But if you're in the caucus, and I'll speak of the caucus because, I was in the Senate, and one of my colleagues there was Tim Scott from South Carolina, Bakari knows. And Tim and I used to talk about this, right? I actually think this is I think this is actually a unique moment for Tim as one of the most prominent Black voices in the Republican Party. Because I think, first of all, I think it's important we have Black people in the Republican Party. Black people need to be everywhere, doing everything, right? And so, I think if you're in the party, I think you got to tell your truth. I think, and part of that truth is the Republican Party's ideology, or at least their approach to things nationally, in recent years has at times been dismissive, at times hostile to Black communities. Now, maybe that's just the rhetoric, but that's the way it seems. And so to me, that's a choice that the Republican Party makes, right? And it's not, I don't want to paint every Republican the same way, but if you believe in the conservative ideology that is at the root of the traditional Republican Party, tell your party leaders that that's what we should focus on, because that's what people are interested in. I've said to Tim on more than one occasion, the Republican Party's greatest failing might be that they keep missing this opportunity actually to steal the Black vote, right? That they actually, pocketbook issues that Black people talk about around their dinner table is the same things that most white people talk around their dinner table, and Republicans. Black people like independence, mostly like small government, like support for businesses, don't like a lot of regulation, right? But they just need to, people want to know if they have a need, government can be there, not necessarily to give them anything, but to help them get what they've earned and deserve. Now, if you have that conversation around a dinner table with a group of Republicans and Democrats, I suspect you might get a lot of agreement if you don't label it one or the other. I think the national parties have decided they like these brands that they've slapped on themselves, and these brands are not particularly inclusive. And I think that's particularly true with the Republican Party.
Bakari, perspective on that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think Mo began by saying Black folks need to be everywhere. It reminds me of a good old Southern saying that we say down here all the time, that if you're not at the table, you on the menu, right? And so I do think we need to be at every table possible. And I do think that my friends who are my friends who are watching who are Black Republicans don't need to lose their self within their party. I think that it's okay to be unapologetically Black and a Republican if that's what you choose to do. I mean, I hope you're not there because you think the line is shorter, but if you are, then that's a different conversation. But if you somehow ascribe to those Reagan-esque beliefs, then I think that you should take your whole self to the table. And what does that mean? You need to be in there advocating for issues that directly affect our people. You need to be in there pushing forward in a Black agenda, right? You need to be in there talking about, because if that ain't something you want to do, then I don't even think this whole, maybe Mo and I talking ain't what you need to hear. But I think that you need to be talking about creating policies that directly affect in a positive fashion people of color. I am, when I was in the General Assembly, and when I do policy and help out people like Frank Scott and Little Rock or Randall Woodfin in Birmingham, I always remind folk that rising tides don't lift all boats. That's the worst political dogma ever created. That bamboozled everybody. Because there are a lot of people in our community that ain't got no boat, or their boat got a hole in it, right? But you have to have You can't have race neutral policy proposals that directly affect race specific problems. You can't. And so, I hope that if you are at that table and that's where you choose to be, you were there to uplift the ideals of your people, because you got there on the back of our people.
Bakari, you gonna run again, man?
Yeah. I miss it. I was happy to be out of it. I mean, I think that when you're an elected official, when you go into retirement as I did, or get put in a retirement as I did, you realize you weren't nearly as important as you thought you were. That's the first level of introspection you go through. And I was elected for my entire 30s. And it was just 20, excuse me. I retired when I was 30, ran for lieutenant governor, got beat. And I've had an awesome time. Got a young family, as you hear in the background, beautiful wife, and we'll figure out what's next. I really hope that I'm gonna run for the United States Congress in the 6th Congressional District one day, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Let me follow up on what you just mentioned. You know, you suffered a defeat. Any learning come out of that you think the next time you set foot back in is going to serve you well?
Yeah, I mean, I ran statewide in South Carolina back when you could have a different party governor and lieutenant governor. So you ran on your own. It's crazy. I raised $750,000 in a statewide race. I saw Jamie Harrison raise $109 million. I got 42% and Jamie got like 43.5. And for me, I just always thought in 2014, it was an awful year to run as a Democrat. It was worse than 2010. I felt like I was chipping away at the glass ceiling for people like Stacey Abrams and Andrew Gillum. And I felt like Andrew and Jamie were chipping away at the glass ceiling. And we thought we were going to break through with Jamie and maybe Mike Espy and, a few others, and Perkins and Louisiana, but we didn't get there. But I think it takes all of our efforts. The lessons that I learned are that people are really nuanced. Black folk in particular. We have to do a better job of giving people a reason to vote for us, not against our opponent. I thought I could have crafted my message and interwoven my story. I did a lot, but I felt like I could have done it more. And there are an entire generation of white folk who won't vote for Black people. And that may not be prevalent throughout the country, but that's definitely the case in a lot of Southern states. Race is a big issue in the South. And the last thing I learned is that you can't nationalize politics in Southern states. It just doesn't work.
Mo, after your appointment, you bowed out. Any perspective on going back? Any thoughts on going back and sticking the feet back in?
Look, I go back down there all the time. I'm down in DC all the time. Listen, it was a privilege to have the chance to serve and to serve. And let me say, and I don't have any doubt here that Bakari would agree with me. Serving, this kind of public service can be incredibly rewarding. It's complicated, it's taxing, it's challenging, but to be empowered and be in position to help your friends and neighbors using the agency of government in a smart and effective way is just remarkable. And I was only there for a little bit of time, but I had enough experience to understand the importance, the privilege, and the awesomeness of that power. So I enjoyed the work. I can also tell you, by the way, I was there long enough to know why people work so hard to get to and work even harder to stay in the United States Senate. It is not a bad gig. And Bakari's right. I still get to refer to myself as senator. I usually only roll it out when I can't get a restaurant reservation. It comes in quite handy. But I like to think of myself as a servant leader. I'm proud of the things I've done in government and around government in the community. I've never necessarily thought of myself as a public figure or an elected figure. So people have talked to me in the past about whether I might want to run. It's not something on my radar screen right now, but doesn't mean that couldn't change at some point in the future, but that's not where, right now, what I spend most of my time doing is trying to make sure folks like Bakari Sellers run again and supporting them in their efforts and supporting people whose values matter to mine. And by the way, newsflash, sometimes those people have an R next to their name, just because they are they focus on things I care about, or I care about them as people and believe that they're there for the right reason, even though I may not agree with them all the time.
Yeah, yeah. So we're running on time now. Just one last thing, just quickly, just any advice for the brothers on the call in this political space? You know, what would you say we should be focused on? You know, one quick nugget to carry us through here. You know, we both talked about stamina, and this is not the time to kind of, you know, take our ball and go home. You know, where should we be focusing our efforts in this moment?
Man, let me just say that the brothers on this call, those of us, the professionalism that we carry, the suits and ties that we put on, the jobs we go to that we're blessed to support our families with. My only piece of advice is sometimes we need to shut up and listen to our other brothers. We need to meet people where they are. We have a tendency, because our suits are nice, our degrees are shiny, to even look down upon our other brothers or not look at them with the same level of respect. I mean, I went through and did some tours in barbershops and in malls and small businesses, man, and just met some of our brothers in North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia during the campaign. And I went, my whole goal was I'm gonna listen to y'all. And to a T, man to man, they would all say how government has passed them by. They ain't get no help from nobody for nothing. And I was able to sit there, take something back, and be able to reframe my thinking and reimagine an America that could work for them as well. And so I think that we should just take more time instead of patting each other on the back every time we get a raise or every time our child gets a great scholarship. Those things are all great. But, you know, also going out there and realize that the people who are out there working with their hands to make sure our communities are that much stronger have a voice too. And for far too long, it's not as if they haven't been yelling. They have. They've just gone unheard.
Thank you for that. And, you know, the spirit of the dinner group is that, you know, it's all inclusive, and, you know, our arms are open to everyone, as Mo knows. Mo, one last word for you.
Yeah, let me just say there was no lies coming out of Bakari Sellers' mouth right there, none at all. And I'll tie it to my comment. What should we be focused on? Focus on community. We really do need to reach out, lift up, reach back, whatever phrase you want to use. That's the strength of our power, is in numbers and in connectivity, and being aware of and being concerned about and attentive to the needs of our community, the vast diaspora we're all part of, right? And so none of us will truly be successful, as Bakari says, if we're willing to leave any of us behind. And that's just real. And so you want to see Black folk continue to climb, be prosperous. And if you're concerned about your own kids or grandkids and what their future is, you know, you got to be concerned about everybody else's kids in the neighborhood too, because that matters.
Nice. Well, we'll end there. Thank you, brothers. You know, Bakari, we have these large gatherings, and we expected to do this actually in person. So, you know, look out for us once the vaccine and everything gets settled and we're good, we're going to come back and shake each other's hands and give each other a hug. And so look out for that at some point in the future. Mo, you already know. So thank you both. Appreciate you. We're going to transition to our next session, which is going to be a tremendous discussion around restorative justice and reentry and supporting our brothers as they, you know, try to get a foothold back into the community. So give us about 3 minutes as we transition. And again, Mo and Bakari, thank you both, brothers.
Emerson, thank you, and Wendell and Paul and the fellas. And Emerson, thank you for my.
You got it?
Yeah, you know what I'm talking about.
I'm not even in on the inside joke. All of y'all gonna have to buy me a drink when we leave. I'll talk to you all later. Thank you so much. God bless you.
All right, Bakari, be good, bro.
Don't worry, I didn't get anything either, so I'm waiting for mine too. All right, Jarvis, Akilan, the next panel, if you got your cameras, you can feel free to turn them on and say hello to folks while we get settled here. Good to see you, Jarvis.
Nice to see you.
Thank you for joining us, Alvin.
Akila, my brother.
Akila, good to see you.
I think Akila.
You're on mute.
You're on mute, Akila.
Peace, brothers. How y'all doing?
We're doing
Good, man, good.
Good. Not bad.
Akila, I got to text your man, Glenn. Make sure he joins. You know that's your chairman section right there. You know that, right?
Right.
Okay.
So I'm not sure. I think we were supposed to have one more panelist, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, no, you're someone, the gentleman from Adams.
Noble.
Correct.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if you communicated with him. I haven't today.
Yeah, no problem. For everyone listening, we're going to start right at 3. We're just, in the green room, if you will, and we let you all in the green room. So just, play along with us. But no, you can go ahead, Jarvis. 3 o'clock, we're ready to go.
Sounds good.
And Noble, when Noble jumps on, he'll jump on.
Cool.
Okay, on you, Jarvis.
Oh, thank you. So welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Really excited to dig into a very important conversation about reentry and restorative justice. We have a fantastic panel assembled here who I will ask to introduce themselves in a moment. But first, I want to introduce myself. So my name is Jarvis Idowu. I am a former prosecutor from the Manhattan District Attorney's Office and currently am serving as the Director of Programming at Prosecutor Impact, an organization that works with district attorneys and their offices around the country really to do sort of culture change work on the line. And a lot of the questions that I'm going to ask the panelists today are really sort of germane to the work that we do. And I think they will be hopefully useful to everyone in attendance as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves. I'd love to start with you, Alvin, and then we'll just move down the line.
Great. Happy to be here. I am a sort of career civil rights lawyer and prosecutor as well. I was a federal prosecutor in Manhattan, and then was the chief deputy attorney general in New York. And I'm now a candidate for Manhattan district attorney, your old job.
You're here.
Akila Sherrell.
Yep, go ahead.
All right. Akila Sherrell. I'm the senior advisor with the Alliance for Safety and Justice. We're a national criminal justice reform organization working on replacing criminal justice like waste with smart justice solutions. Passed some major legislation in California, Prop 47, that I would say probably one of the most progressive pieces of criminal justice reform legislation in the history of the country. I currently manage the city of Newark's community-based public safety initiative under Mayor Rash Baraka.
And Jarvis, just so you know, Victor Dixon has not joined as of yet, but let's keep the conversation moving with both Akila and Alvin.
Oh, great, yeah. So yeah, and when they join us, we'll just have them introduce themselves if they're a few minutes late. But I wanted to start with you, Akila. One of the things that we do here at Prosecutor Impact, right, as I mentioned, is work with sort of the line staff, really to start thinking about the way they do their work in new ways, perhaps in ways that are much more focused on community safety and I should say long-term community safety. And one of the things that comes up really is a struggle around being able to think about the system in a way that, as Angela Davis has described it, right, isn't exactly filling the current footprint, right? Yeah. And so what I'd love to have you reflect on is really, in the work that you've been doing, are there viable alternatives to police, right, as the single point of contact for safety that you think would be able to address, right, community violence, excessive force issues, and, you know, the relationship between the community and law enforcement?
Absolutely. You know, there are concrete, you know, solutions with evidence-based results that have been operating, you know, for over 25 years now in multiple cities across the country that are viable alternatives as well as complementary strategies to police. I mean, as you said, police should never be a single point of contact for safety in our respective communities because safety is such a complex, you know, thing. You know, we used to say public safety and people say police. And the reality is that, you know, you can't have public safety without the public. I think that that organizations like the Newark Community Street Team, the agency that the mayor launched, you know, in Newark and tapped me to actually build infrastructure and run, is a prime example of that. Just in the past 5 years, we've had a 6-decade low in terms of reducing violence and crime in the city. When we started our work, when we piloted in 2015, there was 109 murders in the city. Last year we had 51. And this is because safety is a shared strategy. It's a coordinated approach that we use in the city. And we primarily utilize residents who are unlettered in most cases. I would say 98% of our staff have been justice involved and they don't have letters behind their name. But they have a willing heart. They own the work because it's the community in which they live in. We provide them extensive training in conflict resolution and mediation. I mean, they are the first responders. This is their neighborhood, you know, they live in these communities. Unlike law enforcement who parachutes into the community to arrest someone or to deal with a conflict, and then they leave. Community-based interventionists and assertive outreach workers, they live in these neighborhoods, they respond to situations, they provide maintenance and overall support. They're there to provide and connect, you know, that individual to wraparound services, to, you know, trauma services, to address safety. And I think that that this coordinated strategy has reduced violence significantly in Newark. And I think that, you know, cities like Los Angeles with the Gang Reduction Youth Development Program, 10 consecutive years in a row of decreases of homicide and violent crime. Even when violence spiked in the city, in all of the areas where there's a GRID, a Gang Reduction Youth Development Program, because this work of community-based public safety, it started as kind of like, they used to call it gang intervention program, as if gangs were not somebody's son or somebody's daughter, right? This label was actually dehumanizing the person behind it and desensitizing the public to the cry for help, you know, of many of these young Black and brown boys and girls and young adults who are crying out for help. But we've moved away from gang intervention because I would say 70% of the conflicts that happen in community are over quality of life issues and have nothing at all to do with gangs or any of those type of things. But because individuals have been criminalized, you know, we know Michelle Alexander's book really kind of like language that so well that this, you know, we're at an inflection point, honestly, in which we need to really be lifting up organizations like the Newark Community Street Team, or Life Camp, or the Professional Community Intervention Training Institute, or Chicago CRED, or I mean, there's multiple agencies across the country that are doing phenomenal work, but law enforcement gets all of the credit because they're partnered with academia, you know, and media. And that triad right there, you know, is a very powerful network to break into, for that matter, because we don't see our work as adversarial or as you know, like we're in competition. It's complementary. I mean, law enforcement will never have more intelligence in the community about violence and and crime, never. And so if relationships, if the humanity can actually enter again into public safety, right? If we can bring the humanity back into public safety, then we understand that the root of most of the violence and crime that happen is because of quality of life issues. And if we first address those, If we serve victims better, this is our theory of change in terms of the work, we serve victims better than we prevent them from becoming perpetrators.
Yep. And so you mentioned, so I would love to have you reflect in particular about sort of the role that some of that might play in addressing, right, the tensions that have emerged between the community and law enforcement, right? So thinking about like how that might operate in that space.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a bridge. Very few people really even understand law enforcement or the police department and their function, right? If folks knew, right? I mean, I have a tremendous amount of respect for law enforcement because I work with command staff in multiple cities across the country. And I see the disconnect. I mean, they suffer from the same thing that we're suffering from in the community in that microcosm of the police department, right? So you have structural violence and systemic racism and implicit bias that exist in policing, right? You have a cowboy mentality because this thing was born out of, returning, enslaved people back into chattel slavery, right? We got to know the history of policing, right? And the challenges that exist within its structure and how it makes it difficult in its relationship to working with communities, right? So a lot of officers, if you mention, like a lot of our cops, man, they're being overworked and underpaid in many cases because they're working in very dangerous environments, right? And of course, they choose to do the work. But the thing that doesn't happen in the department, and there's a taboo around it, is trauma. Officers experience high levels of vicarious trauma, traumatic stress, hypervigilance. But if you speak about, you're having some type of emotional, mental, psychological issues, you get degunned and death. And it threatens their ability to be able to provide for their families. Now, most cops join the force because they wanted to help. They want to save, maybe it was out of also a personal thing that maybe they were bullied or something like that, in which they want to provide safety for folks. And I think that what happens is that you get into that system and it's, you don't change the system when you get in it, you conform to it. And so the history of brutality in certain cities, I mean, Newark has a consent decree, right? You put on that uniform and you inherit it, and so a lot of times people can't separate you from the uniform. And so I'm just a big advocate for transparency around, therapeutic counseling and the training, that we need to get cops and officers more trauma training. There's a great organization, EJUSA, that does this training in Newark called Trauma to Trust, in which we take our officers and the community together. The interventionists also participate in those classes, those assertive outreach workers from the community, and they have an opportunity to unpack trauma, their own personal trauma as well as the trauma that's inherent in the work. And I think that it's created, much better relationships. And then, those relationships ripple, because when you know something about someone and they're in that space, they're vulnerable. It transforms the relationship, and allow people to see people beyond the uniforms. We host a bi-monthly forum called the Public Safety Roundtable, in which the community basically created a space to hold law enforcement, community-based organizations, elected officials accountable for public safety services they're provided in the South Ward in the city of Newark. And I mean, it's become one of the most important, kind of policy forums in the city. I mean, we have about 60 people every 2 weeks that participate. And law enforcement has a space in there in which they talk about CompStat stuff. It's not a polite conversation, but we work through a tremendous amount of issues, as community and law enforcement in that space, and have figured out real ways of being able to work together. So I think that community-based intervention also heals the relationship, and because it's the credible messengers, those interventionists who were former gang members, ex-convicts, who are actually doing the work, they're the ones that's also healing, that relationship, between law enforcement because of, some of the stuff in the past.
Love it. I love it. And the point you made about the vicarious trauma that's experienced by law enforcement, Alvin, I'd love to ask you a little bit about, having had the career that you had, and running for their office that you're running for, thinking about the important and powerful work that prosecutors do, how do you see, or how do you think about, vicarious trauma in that context?
Look, I mean, I'm trying to put this in sort of think about my youth and when we didn't even talk about these issues at all, right? I'm thinking about my mom and dad. Mental health wasn't a phrase, right? And so it is great that we are talking about it, but the harm that we see, Akila mentioned the police officers, right? But then the folks who are living here every day, right? The things that we internalize. I'll just give you a personal story from the beginning of the pandemic. My son, who just turned 11 last week, he said, "Your son, you got to put a face mask on. We're going outside." I said, "Well, no, Dad, I don't want to put a face mask on because then they'll think I'm a robber and they'll shoot me," right? That's from a 10-year-old, right? He doesn't know the research about adultification and that the police may see not a 10-year-old, but a 14-year-old, but he's internalized it, right? And that's everywhere, right? That's everywhere all around us, from being policed in a militarized way, from seeing these images of Black and brown bodies assaulted. And it affects all of us, right? It affects us as adults, not just the children. And we have to talk about it more. And in terms of law enforcement's got to not do these things that harms our community, right? Some of this is policing that we talked about, how we police, really doing it in a much more community partnered way. But some of it's coming from the DA's office too, right? Prosecuting things that are not, shouldn't be prosecuted, that end up, have us end up in jail, not being independent from the police. In Manhattan this summer, we had a unsheltered person who was taking up 2 seats on the subway, allegedly, and they arrested him for that, right? So we get to sort of what police intervention should look like. My dad used to run homeless shelters. We shouldn't have police dealing with that issue, right? We need someone like my late father doing that. But not only did they arrest him, then when that was written up in the DA's office, he was also charged with using his face to assault the police officer's hand, right? And I didn't invert the two, right? Just think about how ridiculous that is, right? So that is legitimizing an assault, right? And later a viral video came out, showed the police officer punching him. They dropped that charge, but didn't drop the charge of taking up 2 seats in the subway. So, that's trauma. That's traumatic, right? I don't know if my son saw that video. I don't know if my daughter saw it. I saw it. I'm traumatized. And so we need the police to work more in this kind of community fashion, partnering and following, right? Following the models. We have the resources. I tell folks all the time, I'm a Sunday school teacher. I'm a little league baseball coach, right? Like, we're interacting. We have these structures in our community, and it's for the government to join us in that, and to not try to, do it a different way without us. And then the prosecutors are just hardening some of these systems, ossifying them. And so we need to hold folks accountable and say, we're not going to stand for this trauma anymore. And if I can just one last point, because mental health is, I think, another point of intervention where we need to have a non-police entity. I did a lot of work investigating police conduct that ended up in the deaths of unarmed persons. And a number of them started from mental health issues. Someone calls the police because a relative is in distress, and then that relative ends up dead. Right? The data show nationally that 25% to as much as 50% of those who are killed by police starts with that kind of a call, starts with some sort of mental health. So we need to think about, and they're doing this in some places of the country, and Oregon was one example of having non-police interventions, so we're not talking about the trauma and undoing the trauma, so we don't have it in the first place.
Yeah, I want to sort of stick with you, Alvin. I think what you were describing around the trauma that exists resonates not only as a former prosecutor, but particularly in the work that we're doing. I just, before this panel, came from a session where we were sort of fostering a conversation between formerly incarcerated men and women and a group of prosecutors from Minnesota. And one of the things that came up there was a restorative aspect to the conversation, right, between the men who had the men and women who had in many ways been the authors of incarceration, and some of the men and women who went through it. But one of the things that sort of came up was about what happens on the back end, right, after the case is over. So after that individual is arrested for having his feet on the seats on the subway or taking up 2 seats, right, and gets processed, and the case is either dismissed or not. On the back end, right, there seems to be this gap. There's this place where the prosecutors are sort of like, all right, I'm done. I did my job, got the disposition, and I think the question for them, and that I'd like to sort of put to you, is like, what do you see prosecutors being able to do around, right, the reentry piece, right? What's happening on the back end of a case once you've brought it through the traditional process, right? What do you see the role of sort of prosecutors being around that?
Yeah. We need a reprogram. When you were like this, that's like, I don't even know what the words to put there, but that's the mentality, right? Like, hey, cell door closed, job done, right? When what we need to be doing is thinking up front. Well, first of all, asking, should we bring this case? Does it actually make anyone safer, right? If you clear that threshold and the need to bring a case, thinking about reentry from the beginning, when you're fashioning what accountability looks like, right? And that could be restorative justice process. If it's incarceration and someone's then coming home, thinking about how to support that, right? So, I mentioned earlier, I'm a Sunday school teacher. I think about it through that lens, but I try to always tell people who aren't persuaded by that, it makes us safer, right? If folks come home and don't have housing supports and don't have employment supports, we know what that does to the recidivism number. So it's not only the right thing to do, is good policy. And those are the two issues, housing and employment. And I would start by saying the first thing that prosecutors can do is do no harm. Like right now, we know that, we look at something like an issue like technical parole violations, folks who are going back to jail for being late to a meeting, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And we know the racial data. I mean, I know it in New York. Black people are, 5 times more likely to have a technical violation like that imposed on them. So we got a bad system, and then on top of it, we got the racial disparities. And so what does that do? So I said, do no harm is the first thing. And then 2, we have to police the space. So when I was at the New York State Attorney General's office, we investigated companies that were violating our state law, reflexively discriminating on criminal history. We have a law in New York that says you can't do that. You can look at sort of what the job requires and the skill set and the nexus to the crime of conviction, but you can't reflexively discriminate. And we investigate. We send in, folks with recorders, say, hey, I've got a marijuana possession conviction. Can I work here? They say no. We call the company the next week and hit play on the tape, right? So we have to think about our law enforcement broadly, right? Because they were flouting the law in a way that hurts the system. We have to help folks when they come home, and turning them away from work doesn't do that. So I say do no harm with the technical violations, and then affirmatively police the space to allow for the structures to open up so that people actually provide the employment and housing that's needed. And I know for us, this is personal, right? I mean, I had as many of us have, I've had a relative on my couch, for a year plus, coming home looking for work, highly talented, and just discriminated against at every term. And it's a drag on our economy. It's racial disparities at work, and it's our system compounding itself and compounding that harm and trauma we talked about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Alvin. I have my wife and I have invited in a former juvenile lifer here in Philly to try and help him get on his feet, and just the roadblocks that we are running into in terms of like finding him housing and sort of finding him a job that'll pay a living wage have just been incredible. And on that point, particularly the one around convictions and arrest records and the impact that can have, I'm curious, Akila, are there policies or structural or systemic policies that you would recommend that folks should be advocating for to make life easier, reentry easier for individuals who have conviction or arrest records?
Absolutely. I mean, my sister organization out of California, Californians for Safety and Justice, launched a national campaign called Time Done, right? You serve your sentence, time done. Why, prosecute people socially for the rest of their life behind the mistakes that they made and then they paid their time for? So, there should be, legislation that sunsets convictions and removes them from your record automatically. So we should have a policy that after you serve your time and you did your probationary period, this thing needs to be removed from your record so that you're no longer stigmatized for the rest of your life behind the mistakes that you've made in the past. So that's one thing that I think folks can actually connect to and get involved with. It's a really important piece. I think that also just in terms of even having access when folks are inside, because there's a system of slavery that operates within this system under the 13th Amendment, so that folks is being paid 10 cents an hour, for working at major corporations while they're incarcerated, and they gain skill sets, that they then come out and can't even use because they won't hire them because of felonies. So I think that we need to amend the 13th Amendment, and slavery shouldn't be legal for any way in this country, especially with the legacy of it and how it's impacted people for hundreds of years, right? We should amend the 13th Amendment, and remove that clause that says, you can be put in slavery if you're duly convicted of a crime, right? I also think that as an organization, the Newark Community Street Team, we employ, and this was one of the mandates from the mayor in the city, that 98% of our staff are residents of the neighborhoods in which they live in, right? And so as much as we possibly can, we hire local. And, we give preferences to individuals, especially in this work of community-based intervention, because they're the impacted people and their lived experience brings them closest to, proximity of the violence, because, we're looking at violence as a public health issue. We're looking at it as through that lens that this is a disease that we need to isolate, right? And then perform, our work, our intervention, prevention, and treatment, on, right? And so we like to say that we have a corporate infrastructure, but we don't have a corporate culture, right? We have graduated disciplinary processes. I mean, we'll give an individual 5 to 6 to 7 times, but we have verbal, written course corrections, and we have an internal process that's headed up by my man, Toby Sanders, brother's a genius, that teaches his workforce development course on andragogy. We learned a little something about working, because a lot of these folks, it was their first job, in many cases, right? And some of them, they have genius. But the thing is that the emotional, psychological stuff is in the way of them accessing their gifts. And so we designed some internal systems. And I think that if you're going to do this work, then you have to think about, putting systems in place that support, your population that you're planning to work with. Because we're not waiting for, a new professional class to move back into the South Board in Newark. No, we're rehabilitating the class of people that live right here, right now, and we're making sure that when people fall down, we're picking them right up, and we're investing in their long-term, success. Because if folks who live in these neighborhoods don't own public safety, I mean, we'll never be able to. The Black community, honestly, man, should be the safest neighborhood on the planet. Because if we are the ones that control violence, then we should own safety. You know what I'm saying? And so that's a part of the frame. The new narrative that we're pushing is that the way to get rid of excessive force and misconduct is police your own community and learn how to access your tax dollars and build infrastructure and systems in your neighborhood to do it, because the police don't, they get paid all the time, every time. And so we need to shift some of those dollars into, resident and citizens, informed strategy around safety.
No, one of the things you mentioned a moment ago, right, was about the proximity of some of your staff, right, to the communities that they're serving. And I want to ask you, Alvin, thinking about proximity, right, for prosecutors and thinking about sort of, and I want to shift to sort of a conversation more around restorative justice and restorative practices. There's a tension, right, between, I think, a lot of communities and what law enforcement is doing. And I'm curious how you think about sort of, how restorative justice plays a role in navigating that relationship, right, if any.
Yeah, so as we know from being in our communities, and law enforcement knows too, they just haven't come up with a model to address it, is that, today's witness, right, is the person who's going to be harmed tomorrow, and then may be the defendant next week. And so that's how it is, right? And our system doesn't deal with that. The normal case literally could have you show up one week as a witness and the next week as a defendant, and not even, those two cases not even touch each other, where it's all emanating from the same harm. And that, that is the restorative justice process model helps with that, right? Because we are coming together as a community, and obviously, opted in by the person who's harmed in that case, but in talking this stuff through, right? And people, again, I kind of approach this through a kind of human dignity restoration lens, but I think it's important that we also talk about the practical component, right? So folks who, opt into this not because of some, feeling of redemption, but because they know it's a way to make their neighborhood safer, right? So, someone who says, well, hey, if this person goes away and is incarcerated for 5 years, it doesn't have to face any of the circumstances that led to it. One, I don't get to ask the questions I want to ask, but in terms of sort of just downright practicality, that person's going to come back to my neighborhood in 5 years, worse for the wear. So you sit these processes side by side, what helps address the harm, and what is really more collaborative and helps us. We think about the way we resolve issues in our own networks, right? How we hold people in our lives accountable. It is by having this kind of a process. It's like we've all had that conversation, whether it's the uncle, dad, the older relative, your aunt, who just, basically takes you by the metaphorical collar and says, hey, what's going on? We got to talk about this. And that's what the restorative justice process is. It's scaling that up. But as Akila said, right, these are our neighborhoods. So in a way, it's scaling it up beyond your immediate family, but we're all kind of broad cousins, right? And it's dealing with it from that perspective, and really in a way that can get to the harm, and tie us and recognize we're all in this together. And if we don't have that mentality, then we're gonna end up perpetuating this thing.
Yeah, I think well, let me just pivot to you, Akila. I'm curious, and for the folks who are in attendance who may not be as familiar with restorative principles, I would love, if you can, to have you share a little bit about, like, maybe a narrative about how they've operated in your life, right? The impact that they've had.
Yes. That was a question for me?
That was, yeah.
Okay. Yes. Well, just in terms of like kind of how I've used restorative principles in my life, I mean, centered around, a really horrific incident that happened to me, right? as I don't know if I shared, but I was instrumental in organizing the peace treaty between the Crips and Bloods in Los Angeles in 1992. Changed the quality of life in our community. I grew up in the gang culture, and participated in what a lot of social justice activists call the longest running war, right? Had kids young, growing up in the projects. My oldest son, I raised as a single father, along with three other children. Graduated from high school, went to college, went with friends to a house party in an affluent Black neighborhood on the west side of LA, and was shot to death and killed at the party. I mean, I'm no novice to violence, man. I done witnessed it all my life. But nothing ever prepares you for the loss of your child. And so when you think about like restorative like kind of measures, incidents like this make these things real, and it takes you to a crossroads, right? It's like an initiatory place, because now you have to really live out what it is that you're actually kind of preaching, in a sense, right? And so, I mean, I could have did a lot of things. I'm pretty well known and respected in the neighborhood, and so is my son. And so, I mean, Terrell was 18 years old, and if you can imagine, in the culture I grew up in, you take one of mine, we take one of yours. So that eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth game that we played essentially left us all blind and toothless. And so I wasn't, the peace treaty, we had been doing that work for 16 years at that point. And I wasn't willing to throw away, all of this work that we created in order to save lives in the neighborhood, to take the life of this kid who murdered my son, right? I don't condone what he did in any type of way. But I do see that young Black boy, 17 years old, as a victim. I see him as a kid who don't even see him as, we live in a society that don't even see this young Black boy as human, let alone be willing to ask the perpetrator the question of what happened in his life that caused him to have a callous heart, that he would take another human being's life, right? I want him to be held accountable. I want justice, right? Done. My son's case has been a cold case for 15 years. I gave the detectives the name, address, and telephone number of the perpetrator, right? Because the streets talk. And I could have took that information and did what his folks and my people was hoping that we would do, which was go knock this kid's head off, right? Because that would have been the proper thing to do, in terms of street justice. But, I don't believe in that. I truly believe in the divinity of human beings. I think that people aren't their worst experiences, that we're not the things that have been done to us, and we're not the things that we perpetrated. Those things are only informing who we become. They don't define who we are. And to me, that's the core of restorative practices. It's about having the capacity and ability to put yourselves in the shoes of others. It's compassion. And again, it's not condoning, to say, I want to know what happened to you. I want to meet him and ask him that question. I want to ask his parents, where did they feel like they lost the connection? Then I want to work with him and his family and his, the criminal justice system, if they're involved, to ensure that he gets the proper counseling, therapy, or whatever healing modality is necessary, so that he doesn't define himself forever by this act that he perpetrated. Man, we can't afford to lose not one more Black boy. And I'm not saying, and again, it's not about like, I'm like, I'm a father, man, and all of the emotions pass through me in terms of, revenge and anger and frustration. But what won out was the beautiful community that I have around me. That always, that there's this theme, my brother Orland Bishop always talks about, is discovering the gift in the wound. Is that where the wounds are, it's where the gift lies. And sometimes we have to sit long and hard in the pain and the anguish of the wound, for the gift to actually manifest. So we have to look for it. So the night that my son got shot, and I felt that the days before that something wasn't right. And as I traveled to the scene, I asked myself, I was like, there's a gift in this tragedy. When I went to the hospital, I was like, there's a gift in this. So even as I got the news that he didn't make it, you know what I'm saying? I held vigil for the gift, to show up, and it has, like, man, my a week, 2 weeks later, my son's girlfriend was pregnant, with his baby. My granddaughter just turned 16 years old last month. I mean, so it's a profound gift that comes out of it. I mean, I don't get my son back, but to me, that's the principle, like, kind of restorative practices. And I'm hoping that we can get to a place where we hold space to hear those deep, like, kind of wounds that causes people to make those type of knee-jerk reactions, without, like, condoning, but giving space for people to be able to release that that trauma.
Yeah, I want to first just express that I very much appreciate you going there. I know it's not an easy thing to do on a period, let alone on a Zoom call. But I want to ask you, Alvin, given the work that you've done in the past, particularly around investigating police-involved shootings, right, and the trauma that exists orbiting all in every direction, I think I would love to hear you reflect on, in a similar vein, right, if there were moments where restorative principles and restorative justice sort of showed up around those cases, or if there were opportunities where it might have, and if there's a narrative or something that comes to mind around, in a moment like that where I think there are a lot of wounds, what you saw sort of through that experience.
Yeah. And thank you, Akila, for sharing that. It was profound. I'll maybe broaden the question a little bit to sort of kind of human dignity moments. I ran a statewide unit investigating, deaths caused by police officers of unarmed persons. And when we met with folks who had lost loved ones, who was going to push for the executive order that led to the creation of my job, the human indignities we heard from other prosecutors. Now, I don't know what I was expecting going to the meeting, but we heard family members who said, look, I haven't heard from the prosecutor in a year. We showed up to the scene where my son was lying on the ground dead, and they called us the Perps family, right? We went to the morgue and they said, you can't see your child, right? I mean, like that, what kind of a system is that, right? I mean, this is some of the state has taken a life away in the form of a police officer, and we're going to compound that with these indignities, and it goes beyond that. The whole process, which can be shrouded in mystery and prosecutors not giving updates, and there's a not a charge in the end, just saying, hey, grand jury said X, go away. So we committed it to a different model, where we didn't bring charges, that we would not just meet with the families, but meet with community leaders, and we'd issue an entire report on all of our findings and all of our legal conclusions, and ultimately on policy suggestions to avoid the tragedy, right? I mean, we're never going to bring the person back, but we can at least spend the time and energy to think about, policing practices, legal structures that would prevent something like this happening again. So that's what we did, but it was very sad and sobering to see, families. Again, I've never lost, a loved one to violence in that way, and certainly not by the state. But it's just to see them in those moments. And of course, you can't say I don't know how the investigation is going to turn out, but to try to find ways in every instance to affirm the humanity of their loved one. And if the case goes to trial in particular, and this is, I think, something that we all need to work on collectively together, to hold the media accountable and prosecutors and everyone involved. All of these cases, the defense playbook, and I believe in a robust criminal defense function, but I don't believe in a racist one, right? They all pull out this black boogeyman and they put the decedent on trial. And it's improper as a matter of law. and it's morally disgusting. And so I think we have to sort of call that out. The media does it and plays right into it and sensationalizes it. The defense does it. Sometimes the judge does it. And finding ways to affirm the human dignity of the person who's been shot and killed, the victim and the victim's family through that is really needs to be the focus that we need to all hold all of us accountable. Really, the media, they do this time and time again. And it's the defense playbook, and so that I would say that's not exactly restoration, but the human dignity thread there is what comes to mind.
No, I mean, I think it very much read to me. I'm curious about your thoughts, Akila. Like it very much read to me as part of the healing process, right? That dignity aspect being just germane, right? If there's going to be any chance for healing and restoration. Really appreciative of both of your time today, and I think we're going to move to Q&A in just a moment. I don't know how much time we have left. I'll sort of leave it with this question. We talked a little bit about reentry at the front end, and both of you, I think, shared some thoughts, both general and specific, around what we might do around with. I think to help mitigate the collateral consequences of criminal convictions and arrests. And I'm wondering, just to close us out, if either of you have thoughts on how we might make the reentry process more generally a more restorative process, right? Thinking about reentry. And I see if we're at time, let me know. But I'll sort of end it with that.
Oh, Jarvis, you're good. We have 15 minutes left for Q&A, so you're good.
Oh, great.
So Akila's story was powerful, and I prompted me to kind of, I don't talk about that much in this detail in public, but really kind of inspired by his story. So my brother-in-law, who I mentioned sort of in passing earlier, right? So he was incarcerated for, what someone might say not a long time, but it deeply affected his life. And when I think about sort of trauma and restoration, so he was in accountability too, right? So he was doing things for which he needed to be held accountable. In connection with that, he witnessed his best friend get shot and killed in front of him in a drug shooting. I'm the sort of big brother and the lawyer, so he said, come on down to Atlanta, I need to see you. And I saw him. It was 2 days later. He was, basically, avoiding the police and avoiding the person who he thought had done the shooting, wearing his jeans with the blood of his best friend still on them, right? And I've seen some things, I've never seen a look in someone's eyes like that before, right? So then he's held accountable by the system, incarcerated for his conduct. Then is first day in jail to, fight for his dinner, ends up in solitary confinement. So when I think about the system and what we could do, he gets out, right? This is a system that didn't at all care one whit about the trauma of witnessing a murder of a best friend, didn't care about the trauma that it imposed through solitary confinement, right? In solitary confinement so he could eat. And then, I mentioned the housing and the jobs earlier, but that's just the top of the surface. Obviously, we have to do that. But and we didn't talk about, I was sort of part of his legal process, but we didn't talk about the solitary confinement until years later, right? And I think so I just share that in the spirit of what Akila just shared. I mean, this stuff runs deep. We have to police each other. We have to uplift each other, right? And I mean, I'll just go a step further, which is beyond the lawyer role here, right? We got to love each other, man. So I know this is Black men gathered, right? I go back, I'll just end on this. I go back to my kind of Sunday school, and every year, I'm teaching high school, and I used to teach 7th, 8th grade. I get these boys who didn't want to hold hands when they pray, and there's all this machismo. And I said, look, but we know as adults, sometimes we're like that, right? It's like, we got to love each other, man. We got to hug each other, man. I know we got COVID now, but when that passes, and, we support each other professionally and all that sort of stuff. Sometimes you just got to pause and say, man, how are you doing? How do you feel? And so, Yeah, I've been uplifted by this conversation, and so I just wanted to share that. And this goes beyond any theory of justice or anything. We just got to take care of each other.
That's beautiful. That should be the campaign platform, Alvin.
Well,
I don't know if you.
Jarvis, thank you for leading this important discussion. Alvin, thank you for sharing. Akila, man, thank you for opening up your heart and sort of, making it real. It's unbelievably difficult to think of our system as a system full of empathy, right? And a system that on the front end with policing or in the back end with prosecuting and jail, it's a system that is meant to be restorative. So to that end, I mean, there are many interests that are monetary interests that are within our criminal justice system. So one of the questions in the chat is, can you talk about the impact of privatized jails have in this? What's their incentive that there may be or not with the police departments? And
I'll jump in. I mean, I think, even more broadly than that, the role of money in our system, from the Ferguson report and how they were sort of collecting fines and fees. Here in New York City, there's a mandatory surcharge. They charge you to be prosecuted, right? There's a mandatory surcharge for every case, right? My law school where I teach, we just did a report recently. One of the most prosecuted cases in New York City is driving with a suspended license. And those suspensions largely rise out of fines. And so how we criminalize poverty in all of its forms is something, I'm so glad you raised it, Paul, that we got to kind of remove that. I mean, we can't be balancing our budgets on the back of folks who we prosecute, right? It is just not, it does not sustainable. It doesn't work. It's unsound. It's immoral, and it's a part of the system we don't talk about enough. So thanks for flagging it.
Akila, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that I mean, we've spent hundreds of millions of dollars on a broken criminal justice system that doesn't produce safety for anyone, right? Whether it be the death penalty that costs states hundreds of millions of dollars to house individuals on death row, habeas corpus, all these different things that folks don't know about, all of the hidden costs, right, in terms of the system that we don't know about, because the families, the victims' families is primarily looking for justice. And in many cases, they think that, oh, this person got the death penalty, so, I'm getting, my just due. But the reality is that, nobody trying to traditionally dies on death row. They'll be there for 27 years, and we'll be spending, tens of millions of dollars, you know what I'm saying, in order to keep them and house them and feed them. There just has to be alternative and better ways of being able to create transformative moments and correction. You have, California has the Department of Corrections and Rehab. I'm like, I'd love to see some rehab take place, over there, so that we can start reducing, the state's, budget around that. And I think that there's a lot of really powerful reforms that are being led by prosecutors actually all across the country. Prosecutors are making the best reformers because they're really kind of understanding the inside-outside game. And I think that some of the changes that we're seeing, like Prop 47, Prop 57, it's moving dollars out of systems and reallocating those resources. I think it's really similar to what's happening in terms of reimagining public safety.
Yeah. Jarvis, I hope you chime in on this as well. And this is a really interesting comment from a friend of ours, Trent Helly, who's been a long-time police officer and as a Black man sort of, sometimes has that dichotomy going on. And his comment was as a 27-year-old veteran, as a 27-year veteran, not 27-year-old Trent. I know we're way older than that, brother. But as a 27-year veteran of a greater Boston Police Department, I commend y'all's effort to help this police job to be done better. I, as a Black man, sometimes feel like I'm a man on an island, this social justice issue. So my question to you in terms of your perspective is, when you talk to Black law enforcement officers, what are you hearing? You know, what is different as to what they tell you and the conversations you're having with them than the conversations you might be having with a white police officer?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Oh,
Jarvis, why don't you go and then we'll go to Akila.
yeah, really, really quickly, I'll say, and this was best captured in a experience I had when I was in arraignments. I had a friend visiting from Norway who was waiting for me in the night arraignment shift, and they were sitting in the back for the dinner time break. And when I left and walked out with them, they asked me sincerely, where do all the white people go to get arraigned? And hit me like a ton of bricks. And it wasn't that I didn't perceive that, the revolving door. It just landed on me some kind of way. So I think what I hear from folks is it's just a different vantage point, right? Seeing a disproportionate number of folks who look like you come through in bracelets, it hits you different. It just hits you different. And that's not to mention, I think, the other pieces, which I think are really hard, particularly for black folks in law enforcement, which is like hearing a lot of the ignorant stuff that sometimes colleagues say, right? I remember working I was a law clerk in a different DA's office before I came to Manhattan, and hearing things like, you know, I'll leave it there and I'll pass it to Breck. You know, we had this has changed since Kim Fox has been there, but it used to be in the gang unit, they had a trophy wall of all the faces of the men who had been sentenced to life. So there was the life wall, there was the death wall, there was the shot a cop wall. And it was just rows and rows and rows and rows and rows of black and brown faces. And having to walk past that every day as I went to my desk, it hits you different. And I hear things like that reflected from the folks that I work with, for sure. And I could talk about that forever, but yeah, I'm curious about your thoughts, Alvin.
Wow. Alvin.
Yeah, no, just processing that. Yeah, no, look, it is, and I saw the chat, it said it feels like on an island. And yeah, I know that feeling, you know, where there are not a lot of us in these offices, and we're taking on, you know, a lot of the weight, you know, but at the same time, I think it's a blessing and opportunity, right, to be a voice. You know, I can think about a conversation where we were talking about, you know, you've got to disclose certain conduct to the defense, and you know, had a police officer who had something with the Civilian Complaint Review Board, and folks, you know, I was the only one there who'd ever filed the Civilian Complaint Review allegation. And so I guess what I would say to the comment is, I hear you. I've been in those challenging situations, and that's why I think these discussions are so great, so we can connect. But we are so needed, right? Whether it's you know, someone to point out, like, hey, why we got these pictures on the wall? You know, and someone else will say, oh, that's just pictures. No, we got to take those down, right? And so just to say, I hear you, but you know, press on.
Yeah. Akila, last word on this. What have your conversations with black law enforcement officers have been like?
You know, black law enforcement officers, you know, that I've been in conversation with in different, you know, cities across the country, always talk about just the challenge of being black in the department. You know, most of the departments are suing. Every year there's, you know, a ton of lawsuits against the department for discrimination. It's a really difficult cultural dynamic to navigate. You know, they talk about, you know, the tests and stuff around becoming officers, you know, the biases that take place is just in terms of that. And it also just bringing people into the department in itself. You know, that there are a lot of double standards, you know, within law enforcement that folks can't really speak about without, you know, having to deal with serious consequences. And so, you know, people are quiet.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for your wisdom, your transparency and sincerity, and really insights as to the system, the inequalities that exist within it, and what we can do and think about. I really like that time done concept, Alvin, that you talked about. Those are the type of policies that we need to be talking about. So, thank you, gentlemen. Our next panel actually will probably follow your conversation, and this is a group of leaders, HR leaders, and diversity officers that deal with this issue in terms of how do you take advantage of the workforce that is out there, that is a viable workforce, but because of the legal system, perhaps are not available to us. And so what are the reentry strategies, and what are some of the things that as corporations are dealing with that can help drive more, I would say, reentry strategies for our community. So we're going to give it a minute or so for the next panel to get ready. But thank you again, gentlemen, for a really wonderful discussion. You can see from the chat comments that it really resonated with people. So thank you.
Thank you.
Here. Thank you.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Okay, for our next panel and panelists, just sit tight for a minute and allow a minute transition. And Anthony, I know I see you on, correct? Brother Anthony, is your mic on?
I'm here.
Hey, brother, how you doing?
I'm amazing. How about yourself?
Hey, I'm amazing also, man. Give us a minute and, I'll turn it to you and off we go.
All right, perfect.
So for all that's listening, that was a tremendous conversation. I put in the chat that frontline special, Policing the Police. If you want to see some of Akila's work, definitely take a look at that. Both he and Victor are just doing some tremendous work. So, all right, great. Alvin, I'm gonna turn it over to you, brother. Thank you. I mean, not Alvin, I'm sorry, Anthony.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I'm
yeah,
sorry,
no worries.
Anthony. Anthony, I'm sorry, man.
Oh, no worries. I was literally, I didn't want to, I thought there really was an Alvin. I was gonna.
Yeah. Got you.
So
There you go.
We're good to go?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's an absolute honor on my part to be able to be here with you all to facilitate this conversation with this next dynamic group of amazing people. Let me say this up front, you all, I could spend a half day with each of these leaders and it still wouldn't be enough, to be candid. So I want to say that I don't believe an hour is going to do us justice. It's just no way, with the wisdom and the insight that each of them have to offer. It's just no way we're going to be able to cover all that they can share with you all. So listen, I want to encourage you to go and find them on LinkedIn, find them on Instagram, find them on Facebook, and follow these leaders. They're incredible. They're literally some of the top leaders in the entire world. You want to stay closely connected to each and every one of them. And so what I've done, because again, due to the time and the speed in which this time is going to go by, I've asked them to take just a few moments, to about 2 minutes each, to share a little bit about themselves. We'll get into some Q&A from my side for each of them, and then we'll move into audience Q&A. So without further ado, let me get out of the way and let me ask my great friend Dawn to actually step up and hit for us, lead hit, and then we'll go down the line from there. So Dawn, I turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. Hello, everyone. Really pleased to be here. I'm Dawn Fraser-Bonnert. I am the Executive Vice President and the Global Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for Liberty Mutual, which is headquartered right here in Boston. I've been with the company for almost 8 years, hard to believe, but been in Boston for most of my professional life. Original Air Force brat, so I feel like I've had a chance to be in lots of different cultures, and that's really helped me in the work that I do today. One of the things that Anthony asked us to think about is, like, given this crazy year, what has Liberty been doing that's really different when we think about where we are today versus where we started? And I will tell you a lot. One of the things we're doing mostly, I think, is listening. We have listened to our employees share their fears, their anger, their just annoyance about the system. And we have done that in ways that have allowed our leaders to be vulnerable and really take it in. And that has led to action. So when I think about where we are today versus where we started, obviously we have been focused on how we can keep our folks safe. That's been #1 priority. But we also knew that we had to be more available than ever before. And that has really pushed, I think, our leaders in ways that they had no idea that they could be so open and available. But I think it's made us a stronger organization, and it's prepared us for all of the challenges that we know are continue to come our way. So look forward to sharing more.
Thank you so much, Dawn. That was amazing, concise, and impactful. Thank you. Next up, we have Chris Winton.
Hello, everyone. Chris Winton, Senior Vice President of Human Resources at FedEx Ground. So FedEx Ground is a $22 billion company underneath the FedEx corporate brand. So I actually started FedEx as an intern 23 years ago through Inroads, whose mission is to identify and develop talented young minorities and prepare them to one day be corporate and community leaders. So 23 years ago, I started as an intern. And so the journey from there to here was obviously faced with quite adversity and breaking through some, that proverbial glass ceiling. And I really believe that story is so prevalent today. So to the question of what are we doing in light of everything going on now, it's really how do we take adversity and turn it into advantage? How do we leverage the crisis of now and now use it to innovate on how to go forward? So I'm excited to talk about some of those things today.
Thank you so much, Chris. Next up, we have Stephanie Payne.
Good afternoon, and thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. Stephanie Payne. I am the head of HR at Sodexo in North America. For those not familiar, Sodexo is a quality of life services organization. We provide food services and facilities management to all kinds of different companies. Globally, we have over 400,000 employees, and in North America, which is our largest region, we have over 100,000 employees. Also, really importantly, I work with Emerson Foster, who's one of your hosts today. I would tell you our response to the social unrest and the racial tension that occurred was really immediate. And I'm proud to say that because when everything occurred, I'd only been with Sodexo 7 months myself. And so I really did not know what to expect from the response. And I'll tell you, we have a long way to go, a lot of work to do. But the region leadership team's immediate response was to find ways to make sure that our employees knew that we recognized what was going on and that we understood the impact that it would have on them. And then we really just tried to create space at work for them to talk if they wanted to talk. So we held a lot of listening and learning sessions and panel discussions to try to create that really comfortable space for people to speak up. We supported our African American employee resource group called ALF at Sodexo. We supported them in really taking the lead to have some of these conversations. So they were really peer-to-peer conversations. And then we asked them to help us. And then finally, we doubled down on the work that we were already doing in the diversity and inclusion space and the human resources space. We already had practices and policies really embedded in our organization. So we doubled down and just really wanted to make sure that those things were still being done. There's a whole lot of work to do. I'm excited to be here. It's unfortunate that 8 minutes and 46 seconds became that burning platform for us to really say, what are we doing? Are we doing enough? What more can we do? So I'm excited to hear from others on the panel today, insights and actions that I can take back to Sodexo. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. And up next, we have Clint Wallace.
So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Clint Wallace. It's really a pleasure to be here. And I'm the head of HR for Sanofi North America. And often when I mention the name Sanofi, folks don't recognize it because we are a French company headquartered in Paris. So let me share a few things about us. We're essentially a pharma biotech company committed to the discovery, development, and distribution of therapeutics for patients worldwide. We have about 104,000 employees. Just about 15,000 of them are spread across North America, with critical mass being here in the Northeast. And so when you think of things like vaccines, in fact, we have 2 candidates for the COVID-19 vaccine, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, oncology, immunology, consumer health products, Act mouthwash, Gold Bond products, Icy Hot, that's all a Sanofi product. And our purpose is empowering life. And that's one of the reasons why I roll out of bed every morning, is to go empower the life of patients worldwide. So it's pretty personal for me, and one of the reasons why I'm at Sanofi. For us, what are we doing? Well, much of a lot of what what others have said, but I could tell you within our company, accountability has gone up, and society is demanding change, and the society inside of Sanofi is demanding much more from the leadership than they have in the past. We have tremendous engagement from people in the majority, folks of color. Everyone is truly leaning in. What's also different is we consider this a movement, not an initiative. And with that, it's going to take a lot of tenacity, a lot of resilience, and not be swayed by noise, but being focused and finish. Third, we know what problems we need to fix. And one of the ones that I'll highlight here is just letting go of unconscious bias. In the past, we haven't been as potent as we have with regards to unconscious bias to drive the right kind of outcomes. And as such, we're doing this through a variety of ways, including having conversations. So we're going beyond the one-dimensional approach of representation. Now we're factoring in inclusion and belonging, and truly having people voice over their lived experience. Do I feel like I can thrive? Do I feel like I matter within the Sanofi space? But one of the things that I'll make very crystal clear, and now more than ever, we're listening to our Chief Diversity Officer, and her voice isn't filtered. It's loud. We follow her guidance. We certainly follow the outside-in perspective that she brings, because we know if we don't do that, this movement will fall back. So
Thank you.
Delighted to be here.
Thanks, Clint. Thanks so much for your time. And last but certainly not least, the dynamic Colleen Powell. So Colleen, you're up. Thank you.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for having me on this panel with so many colleagues that I have so much respect for. This year has really, I think, shown us who we are. It has really been a year of leadership. We've seen tons of examples of excellent leadership, of what happens when leaders fail on their duties, and what happens when people really step up to the moment. And it is beyond what it says on your business card. So at my company, we have decided, in PR, they say never waste a good crisis. And I feel compelled as an executive in D&I that George Floyd's death could not be in vain, and that we could not miss this opportunity being sequestered in COVID. Effectively, the whole world has been sent to their rooms without their supper to think and reflect on our behavior and how we impact one another. And so I felt that, number one, we really needed to take advantage of this and enhance our education. People were so disconnected from people, especially people of differences experiences. There were so many people walking into our building and to buildings across the city in pain, and people didn't understand that pain because it was hidden behind a smile. And so I felt the need, ever more than ever, as a Black executive, to speak up on behalf of my Black brothers and speak up on behalf of people of color, and also to be really honest and to use words that we don't traditionally use in corporate rooms, like systemic racism, like historic racism and injustice, and really not mince words about those things. Also, we decided to educate our entire population globally about racial injustice in their communities, because it was so easy to say, well, this is something that happened in Minnesota, this is something that happened in the US, and this is something that happened in the West. And instead, I found examples, stories, movies, excerpts of things across the globe, because racism, colorism, and inequity are not things that are specified to one location. And then finally, we also created took advantage of this moment to say we need to increase hiring, we need to increase opportunity, and we need to make sure that we are doing the things we can to make sure that we're doing enough in the other direction. And then finally, we're just trying to support our employees because everyone is stressed out and pressed and in an extended marathon of survival, and we'd like that to make people eventually be able to thrive. So those are the things we're doing: educating, holding people accountable, increasing our standards, and really pushing the level of supporting one another and being that interdependent community that our culture is known for. At MFS Investment Management, we're the first mutual fund company. We are long-term investors. And this time we need to continue to invest in our communities, in our industry, and also advance the conversation throughout the communities where we live and work.
Thank you all so much for sharing a little bit about who you are. And Clint, I'm going to start with you and ask you to talk a little bit about, maybe in 2 minutes or so, share a little bit about Sanofi's commitment, their true commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So, thank you, Anthony. Look, we're very committed, and we're not in the window dressing business, and certainly not in the lip service business. We're trying to be very thoughtful about this. So, we've taken a couple approaches. Number one, we've started with this openness and transparency, trying to build a culture of awareness and competency. We're doing this at the town hall level. We're doing this at the individual meeting level. We've created a I Learn playlist that can help with the competency of folks who may not live the experience of many of us. For example, one of the ones I like to reference to people is on our I Learn playlist is the look. And when you're in the color of my skin or our skin, you get the look. And we know what the look is when we get it. And so, but we need for folks who don't experience it to understand it so that they can support us on the journey and they could stop the behavior of the look. So we've produced this playlist of periodicals, TED Talks, and videos. They're very short in nature. And I'm happy to share it because it's public stuff to help, again, build that competency and defunk the soundbite from folks that said I didn't know. Another important focus is we're taking somewhat of an agile approach. Some parts of our organization is much more mature, some less so. So we're doing, perhaps focus training sessions with some of our frontline leadership organizations, because we've heard from our frontline employees with regards to the lack of awareness with regards to matters that affect them. Favoritism when it comes to promotion and rewards. We're also taking a page out of an old playbook. In our company, we have business processes, and we track and measure our financials every quarter. And so one of the things we are now doing, I said to our CEO, is, look, we need to have a diversity operating review. We do a financial operating review. Why don't we have a diversity operating review? Looking at all the elements, making sure that the commitments made by the leadership, we're on track to make them. And if they're off track, there's a discussion as to what they're going to do to catch up, that we track the advancement of people within the respective BUs and functions. And we have some transparency and some visibility that this isn't some secret society that information is kept under closed doors. We have some outside in that's brought in to help benefit all with regards to some best practice sharing. So we're very committed. We've been recognized externally by Diversity Inc. Top 50 since 2018, and we have been improving year over year. We were 41 in 2018, 31 in 2019, and 29 in 2020. And so we continue to get externally recognized. But the gift we get from those relationships with places like Diversity Inc. and others is the learnings as to where we can improve. That's really the gift. And we've taken those lessons and made some changes. For example, mentoring is an area that we needed to dial up a bit. And that showed up on the report card as an area of opportunity, and we've made some changes. So I'm excited about the leadership team. The accountability is there. The transparency and visibility is there, and the results will be realized.
Thank you so much, Clint. Dawn, I have a question for you now. So you have an appreciation for allies and allyship. Talk a little bit about how Liberty as a company has, one, embraced this philosophy, this concept, and how is it helping you to enhance representation, equity, inclusion, et cetera, in the company?
Thank you. So, this work of diversity, equity, and inclusion cannot be done by people of color alone. It cannot be done by women or whatever you consider your underrepresented talent. It's just too big. We talked about the issue of systemic racism, whatever the ism. So when I joined Liberty, it was very clear that I was going to need a lot of help, and especially my white men, because when I looked at the demographics of the organization, that was the majority of the organization. And I knew that without them, I wasn't going to be able to do the things that we need to do to make the changes. So having them understand that they were a part of this work and that there was an action that they needed to take, not just a nodding of the heads and, yeah, this is great, Dawn, or this is great, people of color, you go do that. But know that there was a responsibility and accountability in this. And so our Men as Allies work began in 2017, thankfully just before the Me Too events began to happen, which prepared us, as we were talking early then, around gender. But I'm so happy to say that work continued so that we were more prepared, as if anyone can be prepared for what's taken place this year. But we were in a better position given that we had started to pull our leaders together and starting to have those conversations through our workshops talking about race in the workplace, really getting into some of the things that we had not talked about, that Liberty had not talked about probably ever. And so it better prepared us. And actually, we then had champions. We actually had men, our white male leaders, bringing other men into this work, which is certainly making then the whole effort more effective. Because again, we cannot put this all on our ERGs, all on just a few. It does require many more people being involved. And that has really helped us, I think. That and really making Ally be an active action has really pushed us forward to really do, again, more of the hard work that's in front of us.
Thank you all so much. Your wisdom, you all's wisdom is incredible and remarkable. I'm honored to be here to just take all of this stuff in. So thank you all for sharing. Chris, man, I want to come to you quickly. Talk a little bit about the business case. You and I have had some offline conversations, and you have some energy toward this idea of the business case for diversity and inclusion. So you want to talk a little bit about that and profitability and how DE&I really impacts the top and bottom line in the company.
Yeah, sure thing. So at FedEx, our culture, set by our founder, who's still chairman and CEO, Fred Smith, said if you put people first, they'll deliver an awesome service. That's what makes us profitable. You take profit, reinvest it back into people. So we were founded on that concept. That is still live and well today. The challenge I started to see, and like I said, I started as an intern all the way up to now, the diversity, equity, and inclusion conversation would always be in the people bucket. And I equate that to, call mom. Every day when I get up, I know I am supposed to call and check in with my mom. But I get busy, priorities happen, tasks happen, objectives come up. And guess what I forget to do every day? Call my mom until she calls me and reminds me. That's how it's been in this space. Our leaders know they're supposed to do it, but they got it in the people bucket and they have to constantly be reminded. I said, no, we're shifting this to the profitable bucket. Now we got to connect the dots directly. So let's talk about the fact that we've got 500,000 employees. Let's talk about the fact that our business right now is growing because of the e-commerce boom. Let's talk about the fact that we're hiring 10,000 people a week in blue-collar jobs who don't have the degree, which is really the opportunity youth population, which is primarily diverse. So now we got a pipeline in, and it's now let's change our investment strategy into how we give charitably to where now employment pathways as a given strategy into local underserved communities is now part of our profit strategy. Then now when we hire them in, okay, now you got your pipeline coming in, but we need to make sure they got their fair shot. So our employee network groups are now the mentors that are reaching out to develop and prepare them. And then now we're requiring diverse panels in that process. So now we're also educating leaders. Here's where the accountability occurs. The accountability occurs on that panel. And if you're the diverse representation, we're going to educate you on how to disagree agreeably. You can't just be the armed fist. No, you got to be able to disagree with your counterparts, but do it in a way that you maintain the relationship and you educate them right then on what they're seeing and their bias that happens in the moment. And then now we start to show that profitability up through the succession planning and why people can't be what they can't see. And when you have a large blue collar population like us, it's important that representation matters. And so all of these initiatives are now in the profitability bucket, and it's in your everyday work. And I can now put numbers to what we're saving in order to do so. So that shifted the whole conversation. And now I no longer debate with my CFO about dollars associated to this space.
That's amazing. And I'm definitely going to get to Stephanie and to Colleen, because I can't wait to hear from them too. But I want to ask them and others the comments we've heard so far. Maybe we take 2 or 3 minutes here. Does anybody want to comment on any of the comments we've heard so far from our panelists? Anyone want to comment on Dawn or Clint or Chris?
I wanted to comment on what Chris just said about the sort of the business case for diversity. I think you are completely right that it's not just in the people bucket, it's in the profit bucket. But I would also say for us, we don't create widgets. We create intellectual capital. So the question, and we are active managers, which means people are making trades and making business decisions on behalf of clients. So it matters even more who is around that table, who those people are, and that we have different inputs and perspectives into those decisions, because there's well-documented research on how there is an advantage to diversity, and that diverse teams make better contribute to more complex decision making better. If you have a simple problem, a monolithic team is great at that. But if you have complex decisions like the ones in investment processes, then a diverse team is your best bet. So to us, it's really about the analysis advantage, and it's also about how can you be better at your business? Really, all of our companies, no matter what field we're in, have to innovate, and innovation and diversity are deeply connected. So that was the one piece that I think it's not sort of I think it went from a thing that was good to do and that you should do, and now I think it's sort of, you cannot survive if you are not doing things and if you have not engaged the heterogeneity of the global workforce.
Thank you, Colleen. Anyone else want to comment on Dawn or Clint or Chris up to this point? Well, I'm going to toss a question to Stephanie. Stephanie, at Sodexo, talk a little bit about what you all are doing to foster equity, as well as really reinforce this pipeline for recruiting talent of color, people of color, and really move toward retention of that very talent.
Yeah, thanks so much. And yeah, this is a really challenging time. And I know, like everybody else on this call, Sodexo is really faced with reinventing who we are in a space that we're not even quite sure what it's going to look like. Just to share a little bit, our business is faced with about a 30% drop in revenue, and it's hitting every single sector, even those that you wouldn't necessarily think are going to be hit in our business, and we don't even think we're going to recover before 2024. I say all that as the backdrop on, as you can imagine, we do have to really make difficult decisions about how we're going to be, who we're going to be when we evolve through this, what services we're going to provide, and all of that impacts our employees. So to make sure that we continue to foster equity, reinforce the need for diverse pipeline, diverse talent, we have started to take actions and really look at the things that we're doing. Like I said before, I think, at Sodexo, we had a lot of policies, HR policies, and a really robust diversity and inclusion strategy in the practices that we have, even around HR. We have a lot of things that were already baked in. So what I would say again is that we've really said we have to double down on what we're doing. So for instance, we had a selection process, and our selection process already said we're supposed to have a diverse slate. We're supposed to have panel interviews. So now I'm looking under in files and getting involved in places where people probably don't even want me to be, to ask the questions. Did we do it the way we're supposed to do it? And if not, why didn't we do it the way we're supposed to do it? And people get lax. And so I'm finding that we're not always doing what we're supposed to do, and challenging and really forcing what we're supposed to do. Another example, so I've shared with you, where we're at in our region and the decisions that we'll have to make. One of those decisions that we may have to make is around reducing workforce. And so one of the policies that I put in place, because when we have a huge workforce, and so people do things differently. And so what we did was I added a validation process to all of our decisions that we make about removing people from our organization. So now, in addition to whatever business is making the decision, those decisions have to also be reviewed by an HR business partner and the law department, because we want to ensure that the decisions are not only being made fairly, but that they're also not adversely impacting our African American and other people of color, minority group candidates with our talent processes, right? So a lot of times when business gets tough, one of the first things to go is developing your employees. And we know that developing our employees is key to retaining our employees. And so we have continued our talent processes where we're talking about talent, key talent, what should they do next, succession. We continue to do all that. And we've continued with our learning and development programs. What our learning organization has done over the past couple months is they spent a lot of time moving us to a virtual environment for development, so that we could continue the work that we're doing and make sure that we continue to have the tools that we need to keep moving our people through. So it's been a delicate balance to make sure that we are balancing the good business decisions for our future with our HR practices and policies, our diversity inclusion practice and policies, and making sure we continue to drive that through the organization. It's a continued challenge. We'll continue to work on it, but we keep asking our questions. How can we do better? What more can we do? Because we know we have to continue to create and cultivate a diverse and a very comfortable and diverse and inclusive environment in order for us to not only attract, but to keep the talent that we have. And it is a war for talent.
Absolutely. Right, and we can circle back to that. Audience, I'm going to ask one last question to my friend Colleen here, but I want to ask those who are participating with this, start dropping your questions in the chat box. This is a perfect time because right after I ask Colleen this last question, we want to hear from our audience. We want to get you engaged and involved with us here. So Colleen, at your company, the idea of you being a person of color leading, DE&I, in the space that you're in at a really high level. And I know you're super passionate about what you do. So how do you balance your energy and your passion toward this cause with the corporate priorities at your company? Talk a little bit about that for us. And then we're going to turn it over to our audience for some Q&A, and they can circle their questions around our entire panel.
Sure. I think, thank you so much for that question, Anthony. I think one of the things that I really love about my company is that it is a valued-centered company. And so we really had a melding of values when I came there. And so they expect me to show up as myself. And that's good because that's what they get. And so I really find that, Colleen is Colleen all the time. And, at the end of the day, I'm a girl from Brooklyn. And so I bring the perspectives from my upbringing. I bring the perspectives from that I grew up with that are values centered. And I also bring in the data. And I think that I have to embody the mission that we have. I have to embody those values. And so in this work of both DEI and in corporate philanthropy, you know, you really have a lot of opportunities to do a lot it's change work, and it's also values work. So if you don't know who you are, you're not going to find out when you're doing this work. You have to know who you are when you approach it. And then you can infuse that into the organization alongside your values of other people, other team members that you work with. So my job is to create a framework that enables other people to get involved, and then also allows for a public and internal expression of our values, of our lived values and experiences. So one of the things, let me give you an example. So we have the opportunity to give to, and I'll talk about, one of the things I like about having both roles is that you have two ways of going to people. There's some people who get scared when you talk to them about diversity. So you can talk to them about corporate philanthropy, and you can talk about people who don't want to talk about that. You can talk to them about diversity. So you have two ways, and there is some connection between the two. Now, to be clear, corporate diversity is not charity work. It is not. It is business. At the same time, sometimes there are great opportunities. So for instance, the King Boston Project that's being run by Executive Director Imari Paris Jeffries, who's a good friend and colleague. We were one of the first investors. He's looking for 25 people, 25 companies to give $250,000 or more. We were one of the first companies involved. I'm certain there are other companies on this call who did that as well. Wonderful opportunity to combine the two. And also to call other people to do the same thing, because we don't want to be out there on our own, and we're not. This is a community thing. And what we felt was that we have a lot of images of when Boston was not at its best in terms of racial justice. We continue to have issues in our country about that. We need to have a visual monument and an intellectual practice that produces leaders that are focused around the mission of equality, justice, equity, fairness, freedom for all people. And so that's one of the things that we were able to do with the combination of those two efforts.
Beautiful. So as I'm waiting on the audience to jump in, you know, with their questions, I don't see it yet. I'll ask a question. Oh, there's Emerson. He'll jump in. Go ahead.
Anthony, let me get us on the Q&A track here, and just tremendous insight and perspectives from the panelists, and tremendous leaders in their own right. So just a couple of questions that have come through, and actually I'm going to start with my own question. And Stephanie, you know, we're colleagues, so it just reminded me that, you know, as you're looking within this D&I construct, you understand that, you know, every company, they're at a different place, right? And we're all trying to address things that may not be cut across each company. And I'll just speak to the fact of, at Sodexo, our senior leadership population is very, very diverse. Our challenge is below that line. And so, you know, as you all are thinking about the work that you're doing and how to approach it, are there some things there that you feel are maybe nuanced and really something that is particular to your concern that you're really focused on that may not be, you know, something that's apparent or prevalent in another business? Is there something that's particular within your business that you may want to share?
I'll jump in there. I mean, something that's probably more specific to us. I mean, we hire a large population of blue collar that don't go the traditional path. So we've all told and been told and tell our kids, go to school, make good grades so that you can go to college, you know, get your career and go on. And that's the American dream. Well, we know that that's not true for everybody. And if you just look at college dropout rates at freshman year, I mean, the majority of those students drop out. Well, they're coming to work for companies like us, unloading trucks, but they still have aspirations to be something more. So what we're trying to now do is meet them right where they are. So I think I saw a question about what is equity for us. It is meet these people right where they are. So I literally went in undercover as a package handler, unloading trucks, didn't tell anybody who I was, and wasn't that hard either, because I'm a young black man. I show up at the hub with my hat turned on and a t-shirt. I blend right in. So it wasn't that hard to do it, but able to walk through and experience and have these conversations and meet them right where they are and go, hey, do you know that we changed the degree requirements for developers and IT because we know people like you grew up as digital natives. So you got coding skills, and I can give you the job without the degree. And how about you go take this coding boot camp to fine tune it, because that's through one of the nonprofits we sponsor through our charitable giving. So it's free to you. And we're going to be at the graduation. We're going to give you the job as the developer. And when you want to excel, use tuition reimbursement to get your degree. Now you can go on up into management, and that's going to be your path to get there. So it's all about, for us now, these non-traditional pathways, which actually, to me, really is the American dream. We just don't celebrate it and talk about it.
I love that, Chris. I love that. Anyone else?
Yeah, I'd love to jump in here if I could. One of the challenges that we have is that the insurance business is maybe not the sexiest business out there. And so we have to do different things to attract talent. People really don't know about what happens. So that's one focus that we have, is how do we think about attracting a different generation into the organization. Secondly, we're an old business. The company's been around for a long time, and promote from within has been one of the sort of hallmarks of the organization. And while that has really been a strength, it is also now a weakness for us. And that if we do not do a better job to bring in talent from outside of even the industry, again, given the fact that there is shrinkage in the industry, we will not continue to be successful. So it's one of the things that's unique to Liberty, but I also think it's been one of the motivators for us to really think differently. Going back to Colleen, what we were talking about, it is part of our business. The D&I work is part of the strategy. It is not this thing that we have outside. It is what is going to continue to help us be successful as we go forward. And that actually is helping us, I think, motivate people who are thinking about the business, thinking about profitability and our customers to keep moving forward.
Mm-hmm. Let me. Sorry.
I wanted to jump in here a second there to on a couple of points. I think it was referenced earlier. This D&I work is tough stuff, and you have to be bold. You got to be brave. You got to dare to be different, and you can't cower. Couple of things that we have uncovered is, as we look at growth opportunities for people, we had systems that weren't allowing a balanced playing field with regards to who are afforded in our learning programs. And we uncovered that recently. And so now we're being very intentional with regards to when we do get requests for people to go to our marquee programs, that because we are European owned, typically it's more gender focused, but now it has balance with people of color representation. The other thing that's critical is, we've challenged the business on, is when we prescribe, when we go and advertise our jobs, we are over prescribing. And as a result of over prescribing, we are screening out really good people. And so now the pushback is, why does that person need 12 years experience? You give somebody else a shot at 8. Why doesn't that become the standard? Because when that becomes the standard, you just opened up your pipe with regards to your talent pipeline. The other thing is, again, we're a very old company, very traditional, made up of a lot of different acquisitions. We're comfortable with what we're comfortable with, but we are yet to be uncomfortable, being comfortable with being uncomfortable by trying new things. So we have pushed the organization to say, look, you've always gone and siphoned talent from this pipeline. Now we're going to expand beyond that. And so we're for the Inroads alum, we're going to Inroads now. We just did a relationship with Inroads, the Hispanic Heritage Fund. So now we're widening the pipe, and we're saying it to include academia, by the way. And so we're saying we don't have to always go to the same places, because if we are such a diverse company, our patients are diverse, our workforce has to be diverse. We need the differences, perspectives. And if you keep going to the same place, you're going to get the same outcome. It's not going to change.
Let me touch on touch on that perspective around broadening the pipeline. You all came on the heels of the restorative justice discussion. And when we're thinking about equity and community upliftment, et cetera, oftentimes we leave off our returning citizens out of that paradigm. And so for your companies, what are your companies doing to engage a population right now that frankly may be returning, maybe looking to get their feet, back in the game, if you will, and historically have been left on the sidelines, right? The Corey is the barrier and they can't get in. And so, any of our companies doing anything progressive in that space to really address that population. And if not, that's okay. But I'm curious the perspective around that, because we have, a number of returning citizens, obviously, and we're looking to increase pipeline and talent, and we're leaving that pipeline on the sideline. So any perspective on that? That's a general.
I'll chime in there. And I caught the tail end of the last panel, which I think kind of teed up reentry as a pipeline, and it's one of those that many companies, us included, have had reservations about the risk associated with it. But what we're doing now in terms of those pipelines that we've felt were risky before, this is where we get to now lean into technology and a lot of the assessments and machine learning that's out there. So one particular program that I'm favor of is U-Science. And what it does is it allows, similar to a gamification, you play the game, but it tells an individual what they have a high aptitude for. And what we do is we give our jobs to U-Science, and the output to the candidate is a career site. And so instead of, we've all done the Myers-Briggs and all of those assessments, and you pretty much need a degree to understand it. This is a simple career site to say, these are the jobs you already have a high aptitude for. And then now we're going to engage with you on what a career like that looks like. And here's the pathway and the steps to get there. And so we're now, and the key relationship in the middle is the nonprofit organization that's got the relationship with the individual to address the soft skills or the interpersonal skills that we're looking for. And then we're going to now meet them at the middle on the job that they got the high aptitude for. And now we're going to help you build the pathway to get there. So those two together is what we feel makes that pathway realistic.
Sure.
Hey, Emerson, hi, this is Stephanie. And I did not join to hear the last conversation, but if it's about reentry, I would share with you at Sodexo, our process is that we remove the barrier, number one, of an automatic no, right? And we have a team of employees in place when a background check or something comes up, and we need to have more conversation, that does just that. That reaches out to a hiring manager and has a conversation about the pros and the cons and the skills that this person would bring. But what we have done is we've removed the automatic barrier to joining Sodexo because of your past experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Wonderful, wonderful. Colleen, I want, you mentioned something earlier that I want to seize on, and you mentioned not mincing words. In this time, I think it gave, hopefully we all had our voice before, but certainly I think it gave many of us, our voice became louder in this time, right? To really challenge our companies, challenge our colleagues to do more. And just talk a little bit about how that manifested itself at MFS. And, I'll ask anyone else to chime in on that as well. I'm just curious the type of dialogue that took place internally.
Sure. I'm glad you asked that, Emerson, because as African-American professionals or professionals of color, honestly, we don't talk a lot about race sometimes. We do talk about it in our role. We're very comfortable talking about it in terms of PowerPoints and programs and things that we're doing to move things through the company, because we don't want to be perceived. We don't want our voices to be minimized by seeming as if we're playing the race card or seeming as if we're favoring one group over another or our group versus someone else. You really want to be fair to all groups and to be able to see it as a business problem and business process. But I have to say that the incident of the murder of George Floyd really made me put aside all of those considerations. I decided to, on several occasions, speak up personally, as I thought to myself, I am the most senior Black woman at my company. And quite frankly, that should not be the case. And when I thought about other senior Black males in my company, I thought, every time I saw other Black men in the business space, they were just so pained. They just didn't want to go there. And I understood that. And I just said, I have a Black husband, I have a Black father. My closest friends and colleagues are Black men. I have been raised by Black men. I love Black men. They have loved me. They have made me who I am. And I could not be silent. And so I spoke up, and I spoke up passionately and personally about Black men and about what this was like to see Black men turned into a caricature of their humanity. And I also spoke up not only in my department, but internally in my company in front of the entire company. And I spoke up with my white CEO, and he also joined me in that conversation, which was wonderful to see. And then I spoke up in the business community to CEOs. I sit on the Mass Business Roundtable, and I said, I was sitting, and I said, you know what? I need you all to know that a lot of your employees are very scared right now. They are scared to walk into your fancy office buildings downtown because they are seen differently when they walk into them. That they go out and they take extra precautions when they are walking their dog or going to work or doing everyday things that you take for granted. And you really need to check in with them. And there was a lot of kind of, oh, I feel awkward. I'm not sure what to say, whatever. And I think there was a lot of, and then I made all of our managers check in with their teams. And to be honest, they were scared. They were like, I don't know what to say. I don't want to say the wrong thing. And I was like, you know what? You got to do it. And I gave them coaching. We gave them, an FAQ, we gave them coaching, we gave them 2 different documents, say, you're going to talk to your teams, you're going to do this. Like, we're all going to go there together. And it wasn't to punish, it was really just to build bridges. And a lot of them came back. I had 3 very senior white men speak at one of our highest committees and said this was the best conversation I'd had. They said, one of the people from my team left our meeting talking about racial injustice and said this is the best meeting I've been to in 25 years. So I decided that it was really important to, I just thought about what would my father say? And my father would have said, he really was the architect of the woman I have become in society. And I just felt like he would say, what are you there for? What am I there for? But if not to lift my voice. So I really just didn't want for that man's death to be in vain. I wanted them to know that though I dress in nice clothes and look nice in this corporate setting, that he looks like my cousin. He looks like a lot of my brothers and my friends, and he looks like a lot of their employees, and that they needed to show some concern for, or even just connect with and understand what this felt like to carry so that we don't have to carry it alone. And so I don't regret those decisions, and I will not be silent in the voice of injustice, whether it is for my community or for another community that I feel needs a voice. And so I felt like, and I felt like people could have made different decisions. I respect that, but I felt that when there are few of us, we have to speak up. We just have to. When I was a little girl and I was the only little Black girl in the gifted class, my father said, you need to have more. She should not be the only one. And so there were other people who benefited from that decision. So I have to do that for the next generation, or else it's a waste of time for me to be here.
Yeah, I
Thank you
will
for that.
jump in on that one too, Emerson. I'll tell you, in my 27, almost 28-year career, this year was the first in a corporate setting I've been as vocal to talk about, as a Black man growing up in corporate America since 1993. It has not been easy. I've been called lazy. I've been standing by and been told you need one more job when I see somebody less qualified than me get promoted. I've been, in the role that I have now, a pretty senior role, top 50 in a 104,000 company. When people meet me for the first time, I get the look like, really? You have that job? And when you express certain things to people, they go, no, not you. And so this year was the first where I have been very vocal, and to the point to tell folks, look, when you say no, not you, don't do that, because what that makes me feel like is I'm not telling the truth, and it's like you're in denial with regards to the facts. And so what you need to do is you need to listen and to learn from the experience. And as you listen and learn from my experience and the experience of others, you can make us stop suffering in silence. and that the environment becomes better for us and that we have an opportunity to advance just like everyone else. And so, as a result of that, I have some very, very senior Caucasian leaders who have come to me and said, I have learned from you. Thank you. And so I said to myself, I'm 51 years old, and at this stage of my life, if being open and transparent and vocal about what my experience is, if my company is gonna turn its back on me, then that's not the company for me. I've been and I'm okay with that, right? But I've been fortunate that it's been much more positive, and folks have humbled themselves and have learned, and as a result is holding hands with us now on this movement to make sustained change.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to go to Don on that point, because this conversation that we're having actually was birthed out of another conversation that we had, and we were lucky to have Tim Sweeney as one of the leaders at Liberty Mutual. We had 5 white male CEOs and leaders in their business with the dinner group, with our group, speaking to us. And Tim Sweeney was one of those individuals that took the challenge, I would say, to step into the ring and have some real direct and open conversation. And so, Dawn, for you, how have you seen Tim and individuals like Tim present themselves in this time? And others, Stephanie, we have folks like, and David Bailey was on that call as well. David is my boss, my direct boss and CEO at Sodexo, and David was on that call as well with Tim. But I'm just curious how we're seeing these leaders, these Caucasian males, really stepping into this in a different way.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I am incredibly proud of the courage of our leadership. As I think I said at the very beginning, this has been a year where we have really listened and not just waited passively, but Tim and many other leaders at his level have reached out. So, right after the murders occurred, our CEO that Sunday was on the phone reaching out to many of our Black leaders. I was on that call where he said, I want to hear, I want to talk with you. I want to know, what can we do? And we agreed that, days later, that we would actually hold a session for the entire company to hear what he was hearing on that Sunday afternoon. And Tim has done the same thing within his organization. I mean, I'm pleased that, it has not been easy, but it has taken a certain amount of courage and vulnerability to listen to some hard stuff, some things that perhaps, you wish weren't happening within the company that you hold very dear. But I appreciate that this year, and I go back, Colleen, and I was about ready to drop the mic when you finished, people have felt like this is the time. And we have worked with many of our leaders being real to share their experience. And I'm pleased to say that many of our white leaders are wanting to hear that and recognize, okay, we got work to do. I've got work to do. And they've looked at it, at the personal level, not just at the institutional level, recognize I've got some work to do, and have been really, really direct and transparent in sharing that with the organization. Not that they have all the answers, but they're really open to listening and hearing. And, Tim's a perfect example of that.
And can I say one thing?
Yes.
I asked, my CEO is from Minnesota, and I asked him, we were talking about our response and how we would communicate to employees. And I said, you know what, I think you and I should talk. We should have a conversation about race in front of the whole company. What do you think? And I said, I think that if you and I can have I'm a Black girl from Brooklyn and you're a white man from Minnesota. And if we can have a civil conversation about this, we will be modeling what we were asking all of our managers to do with their teams. And he said, yeah, let's do it. So we did it unscripted. We talked about different themes that we wanted to make sure were covered, but we just had a conversation, invited the entire company. We had such wonderful feedback, just like, thank you. And wow, you just, nobody fought anybody, nobody cried, nobody. And also just be able to just sort of address things as human beings. And that's really what people want. People just want to be seen as human. So I would encourage people it takes courage on our part, and it also takes courage on their part. And I've had a similar experience as Dawn, where the leadership has stepped up. And a lot of straight white males, to be honest, are my strongest D&I advocates in the company.
Well, that's great to hear. And I don't know if we lost Anthony, but I was going to turn it back to Anthony to close us out. But if I don't see him, so we may have lost him. But that's very insightful, and I think we know, and I think someone mentioned it earlier. Oftentimes, it was us, right, trying to, we were being impacted by these negative consequences, and then we were being also asked to fix it. Right. And so, we're getting pounded on this side, and we're also being asked to develop strategies and be the ones that's out front, really trying to address them. And, I think I felt really good about seeing others step into this space more forcefully. So it's great to hear that your leaders are stepping in. So thank you for those insightful comments and feedback and perspectives. You guys, I know each one of you. And I know the work that you do, and Chris, I don't know you well, but I'll get to know you, brother. But you all do terrific work, and I think you're advancing and helping your companies move forward. So thank you for participating here. And we could have done this for 2 hours, 3 hours, and we know that. And maybe we'll come back and do that when we're live together at some point. So thank you for that. I am going to transition us now to our career marketplace. And for the ones of you on the call, the couple hundred that are still with us, 100 plus that are still with us, we have some of these great companies that are in this virtual career space that's taking place in our next session from 5 to 6 p.m. So make sure you go into the Cadence platform, click on the link for each company that is present there, and you can get into that virtual space and talk about job opportunities, talk about career opportunities, and learn a little bit about these organizations. So definitely take the opportunity to do that. I'm going to take this opportunity now to just close us out for the 2 days that we were together. Paul and I, and Paul, you can come back on screen, brother. Paul and I are incredibly grateful to, one, all the attendees that decided to spend what amounted to, I guess, 8 hours, right, with us over the 12th and the 19th. The panel that came together and committee that came together to put this together, it was rushed. And we did it in record time, and we were able to engage some incredible leaders that provided an incredible insight. I mean, I just go back to Akila's story about his son. You talk about a moving experience that happened this afternoon. I reflect back on the CEO panel that took place on the 12th with some tremendous Black men and Latino men that are just, running great business and doing great for not only their business, but for their community. So all around, this conference for us was tremendous. You should know, again, and I mentioned it a couple times, that Paul and I, our focus was to do this live, and we will. So in a year or whenever, the COVID piece settles and we're back, you will be hopefully coming to Boston for a live event with the dinner group. And you should know that even though we're talking with our men today, we do have a women's dinner group as well, and you'll hear more about that moving forward. So thank you all. We'll transition. Paul, any last words?
Thank you. Just re-energizing conversations. Just want to thank all the panelists and all of you for really hanging with them for this 2 days. It's been amazing. We learned a lot from it, and we promised that we're going to do better next time. I don't know how we're going to be able to top it, but certainly for being our first conference and it being virtual, I think we're pleased with how it came out, but more pleased that you all were able to enjoy it. And based on the comments and the questions, that it really was useful for many of you. So thank you.
Thank you for a great committee. Have a great evening. Go to the career rooms and talk soon. Thank you very much.